The gunshot split the night like thunder, and Lena Hart stood between the barrel and the man she loved. Blood bloomed across her shirt as the mob froze, their certainty crumbling into horror. In that instant, everything Dry Hollow believed about justice, about outsiders, about the warrior named Cale Rourke, shattered. But this moment didn't begin with a bullet. It began months earlier when a stranger rode into town carrying ghosts no one could see, and a woman from the east refused to let fear choose her fate. Stay with me until the end. Like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The weight of arrival. The desert wind carried dust and judgment in equal measure. Cale Rourke rode into Dry Hollow on a horse that had seen better days, his saddlebags light, his eyes lighter still. The town sprawled before him like a wound that refused to heal. Wooden buildings bleached gray by the sun, streets carved into hard-packed earth, and faces that turned toward him with the kind of suspicion that lived in the bones of border towns. He didn't expect welcome. He'd stopped expecting that years ago. The general store squatted at the intersection of Main and Dust, because that's what the locals called the Second Street, and no one had bothered to correct it. Cale dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, unthreatening. He'd learned to make himself small in spaces that didn't want him, learned to measure every gesture against the possibility of violence. The door chimed as he entered. 3 men stood at the counter, their conversation dying the moment his shadow crossed the threshold. The shopkeeper, a weathered man with suspicious eyes and capable hands, looked him over like he was assessing livestock. "Help you?" The words carried no hospitality. "Supplies," Cale said. "Flour, salt, coffee, whatever dried meat you have." "Passing through?" "It was a test. It was always a test." "Looking to settle," Cale said. "Heard there's land available on the western edge." The silence that followed had teeth. One of the men at the counter turned fully now, broad-shouldered, sun-scarred, with the entitled posture of someone who'd never been told no. "That's Broken Creek land. Nobody settles there." "It's unclaimed," Cale said evenly. "I checked with the land office in Redemption Springs." "Don't care what some paper pusher told you." The man stepped forward. "That land's got history, bad history. We don't need more trouble out there." Cale met his gaze without flinching, without heat. "I'm not trouble." "You look like trouble." The man's hand drifted toward his belt. "You got that warrior stink on you. I can smell it." The shopkeeper cleared his throat. "Cass, the man just wants supplies. And I'm just making sure he understands how things work in Dry Hollow." Cass didn't break eye contact. "We've got enough problems without adding more." Cale felt the familiar weight settle over his shoulders, the exhaustion of being seen as a threat simply for existing. He could walk away. He'd walked away from harder confrontations than this, but something in him, some stubborn kernel of defiance he couldn't quite kill, made him hold his ground. "I understand how things work," Cale said quietly. "I've seen 100 towns like this one. Fear runs them. Suspicion keeps them small. But I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking for flour and salt." Cass's jaw tightened. "You've got a smart mouth for someone who just rode in." "I've got a tired mouth," Cale corrected. "There's a difference." For a moment, the store balanced on the edge of violence. Cale could see it in the set of Cass's shoulders, the way his fingers flexed, the micro-movements that preceded a swing. He'd been in enough fights to recognize the warning signs, and he'd lost enough to know that winning wouldn't change anything. But the shopkeeper intervened. "Cass, your wife's expecting you, and I've got business to run." The tension held for another heartbeat, then broke. Cass stepped back, his sneer firmly in place. "Watch yourself, warrior. This town's got a long memory." "Most do," Cale said. Cass and his companions left, the door chiming their exit like a small victory. The shopkeeper studied Cale with new interest. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of weary recognition. "You really settling out at Broken Creek?" "That's the plan." "You know why it's broken?" "I know enough." The shopkeeper began gathering supplies. 3 families tried settling there in the last 10 years. None lasted more than a season. It's right on the edge, too close to native lands for comfort, too far from town for help, and the water situation's complicated. "I've dealt with complicated before." "I'm sure you have." The shopkeeper set a bag of flour on the counter. But out here, complicated gets people killed. The tribes don't take kindly to settlers pushing boundaries, and the town doesn't take kindly to anyone who might give them an excuse for trouble. Then I'll be sure not to give them one. The shopkeeper almost smiled. You already did, just by walking through that door. But I suppose a man's got a right to try. He tallied the supplies. That'll be $8. Cale paid, gathered his goods, and returned to his horse. The street watched him leave, curtains twitching, conversations pausing, eyes tracking his movement like he was a storm cloud on the horizon. He'd grown used to being weather, something people endured rather than welcomed. The ride to Broken Creek took an hour. The land opened up gradually, the town's cluttered anxiety giving way to sparse scrub and red earth. The creek itself was more promise than reality, a thin ribbon of water that probably swelled in spring and withered by late summer. But there was enough. Enough water, enough space, enough distance from the judgment in Dry Hollow's eyes. The cabin that came with the land was more hope than structure. 3 walls stood fully, the 4th sagged like a drunk, and the roof had more sky than shingle. But it was shelter, and Kyle had built with less. He worked through the afternoon, his hands remembering the rhythms of construction, his body settling into the familiar ache of useful labor. This was the trade he'd made with himself. Violence for building, destruction for creation. He'd been good at war once, exceptionally good. The kind of good that kept him awake at night, that turned memories into accusers. But out here, alone with hammer and nail, he could almost forget. Almost. The sun was setting when he heard the wagon. Kyle looked up from the wall he was bracing to see a covered wagon approaching from town, pulled by 2 sturdy horses. A man drove, older, gray-bearded, with the careful posture of someone who'd learned caution the hard way. Beside him sat a young woman, and even from a distance, Kyle could see the difference between them and the town's usual residents. They weren't afraid of him. The wagon stopped 20 yards out. The man raised his hand in greeting, palm open, empty of threat. "Afternoon," he called. "Mind if we approach?" "It's a free country," Kyle said, though he knew that was only sometimes true. The wagon rolled forward. Up close, the man's face showed intelligence and weathering in equal measure, a scholar who'd been forced to become practical. The young woman beside him had sharp eyes the color of creek water, and a jawline that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "I'm Ethan Hart," the man said. "This is my daughter, Lena. We're staying in town while I conduct some business. I'm a surveyor and mapmaker. Heard you were settling out here and thought we'd introduce ourselves." Kel Rourke. He didn't offer his hand, uncertain if it would be taken. Lena studied him with a directness that was almost unsettling. "You're the warrior everyone's talking about." "I'm a man trying to build a cabin." "Those things aren't mutually exclusive," she said, "though I imagine you wish they were." Kyle found himself surprised into something close to a smile. "You imagine right." Ethan climbed down from the wagon, moving with the stiffness of someone who'd spent too long sitting. "We won't keep you. But I wanted to say, whatever Cass Miller or his friends told you in town, don't take it as universal opinion. Some of us believe a man deserves a chance to prove himself by his actions, not his past." "That's generous." "It's practical," Ethan corrected. "Border towns need all the good people they can get. Driving them away because they don't fit some narrow definition of acceptable is how places die." Lena was still watching Kyle with that unsettling directness. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "Why here? Why Dry Hollow?" It was the question Kale had been asking himself for months. Why this town, this land, this particular flavor of hostile welcome? He could have gone anywhere, should have gone somewhere easier. "Because easy places don't let you forget," he said finally. "Hard places give you something else to think about." Lena nodded like this made perfect sense. "My father and I came from Philadelphia. After my mother died, the city felt like a museum full of her ghost. So we went looking for somewhere that wouldn't remind us at every corner." "Did you find it?" "We found Dry Hollow, which is about as far from Philadelphia as you can get without falling off the edge of the world." She smiled, and it transformed her face. "But the forgetting part? That's still a work in progress." Ethan cleared his throat gently. "We should let you get back to your building. But if you need anything, tools, advice, a second pair of hands, we're staying at the boarding house on 3rd Street. "I appreciate that." They climbed back into the wagon, but before they left, Lena looked back. Mr. Rourke, the people in town are scared. Not of you specifically, but of everything you represent. Change, unknown. The possibility that their neat little boxes of who belongs and who doesn't might be wrong. But fear is a choice. Remember that. The wagon rolled away, leaving Kael standing in the dust with her words hanging in the air like smoke. Fear is a choice. He'd spent so long being the thing people feared, he'd almost forgotten that it worked both ways. The architecture of suspicion. The next 3 weeks passed in a rhythm of labor and silence. Kael rebuilt the cabin wall by wall, board by board, each nail driven with the kind of precision that came from needing to do something perfectly. The town left him alone, or rather, left him isolated. No one came to help. No one came to hinder. He existed in a bubble of tolerance that felt more like containment. But Lena Hart came. She arrived the first time on a Tuesday afternoon, riding a brown mare with a saddlebag full of books. She didn't ask permission or offer explanation. She simply dismounted, found a spot of shade, and read while Kael worked. After an hour, she said, "The roof pitch is wrong." Kael paused mid-swing. "Excuse me?" "Your roof pitch. You're building it too shallow. Come winter, if you get heavy snow, the weight will be a problem. You need at least a 412 pitch out here." He studied her, then studied the roof frame he'd been constructing. "You know carpentry. I know physics and practical engineering. My mother was an architect. I grew up reading her manuals and accompanying her to building sites." Lena closed her book. "I also know stubbornness when I see it. So if you'd rather make a mistake than take advice from a woman half your age, I understand." Kael surprised himself by laughing, a rusty sound he barely recognized. "I'd rather not make a mistake at all. 412 pitch? At minimum." He adjusted his plans. Lena returned to her book. They didn't speak again that afternoon, but something had shifted. A door opened to a possibility Kael had stopped believing in. The possibility of uncomplicated companionship. She came back 2 days later, then 3 days after that, then with increasing regularity until her presence became part of the landscape, as natural as the wind that carved shapes into the dust. They talked while he worked. Small things at first, the weather, the quality of the water, the peculiar social architecture of Dry Hollow. But gradually, the conversations deepened. "Why did you stop fighting?" she asked one afternoon. Kael was installing window frames, his hands steady on the wood. "Because I got good at it." Most people would say that's a reason to continue. Most people haven't seen what good looks like. He set the frame, checked its level, adjusted. When you're good at violence, people give you reasons to use it. They make it feel righteous, necessary. Until one day you realize you're not solving problems, you're just creating different ones. Lena considered this. What made you realize? A village called Silver Creek. The words came out flat, drained of emotion by repetition in his own mind. We were supposed to protect it. Instead, we burned it. And when I asked why, I got 5 different answers from 5 different people. That's when I understood. Nobody really knew. We were just following momentum. And after? After I walked away. Some called it desertion. Some called it cowardice. I called it the first honest thing I'd done in years. Lena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a gentleness that somehow didn't feel like pity. Courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about stopping. Tell that to Dry Hollow. I did, actually, at the church social last week. Kael turned to look at her fully. You what? Mrs. Patterson was holding forth about how dangerous you were, how the town should run you off before you brought trouble. So I asked her what trouble you'd actually caused. She couldn't name any. Then I asked if she believed people could change, or if we were all locked into our worst moments forever. She didn't like that question. Lena. Kael set down his tools. You can't do that. Do what? Defend me. Not here. These people, they'll turn that anger onto you. Let them. Her chin lifted with a defiance that was both admirable and terrifying. I didn't come to Dry Hollow to make friends with cowards. I came to escape ghosts, and I'll be damned if I let a town full of frightened people create new ones. It's not about being damned. It's about being safe. Safe is overrated. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. My mother used to say that buildings fall down for two reasons: bad foundations or too much compromise. The same is true for people. I've watched my father compromise himself smaller and smaller since she died, trying to fit into spaces that don't want him. I won't do the same. Your father's trying to protect you. I know, but protection isn't the same as living. She walked to her horse, then paused. Do you know what I see when I look at you, mister? Rourke? A killer trying to pretend he's not? A builder who's forgotten he ever was. She mounted her horse with practiced ease. The difference matters, at least to me. She rode away, leaving Kyle standing in the half-finished cabin, her words working through him like water through limestone, slowly eroding the certainty of his own worthlessness. The cartography of hate. The trouble started, as trouble usually did, with drinking and wounded pride. Cass Miller had been nursing both since Kyle's arrival. He'd built his identity on being the town's protector, its first line of defense against the chaos of the borderlands. Kyle's quiet presence was a challenge to that identity, proof that you didn't need bluster and threat to survive. It ate at Cass like rust. The confrontation came on a Saturday evening. Kyle had ridden into town for supplies, a routine trip he'd made weekly without incident. But routine had a way of shattering in border towns. He was loading his horse outside the general store when Cass and three companions cornered him. They'd been drinking at the saloon, not enough to be sloppy, but enough to feel righteous. Rourke, Cass's voice carried across the street. We need to talk. Kale kept loading his supplies. About what? About you and the Hart girl. Now Kale did turn. Miss Hart is free to spend her time however she chooses. She's choosing wrong. Cass stepped closer, his companions fanning out, a pack behavior Kyle recognized instantly. You're putting ideas in her head, making her think she can just ignore how this town works. I'm not putting anything in her head. She came to her own conclusions. Bullshit. Another man spoke now, younger, with a face like uncooked dough and eyes that suggested cruelty. My sister works at the boarding house. Says the Hart girl's been talking about you, defending you, making the other women think you're some kind of misunderstood hero. Kyle felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the pre-violence tension he'd hoped to leave behind. I never asked for defense. But you're getting it anyway. Cass was very close now. And that makes problems for the rest of us. See, we've got an understanding out here. Settlers stay in their lane, natives stay in theirs, and warriors who can't tell the difference don't stay at all. I'm not a warrior anymore. Once a killer, always a killer. Cass's hand moved toward his gun. The only question is whether you'll leave peaceable or whether we'll need to convince you. The street had gone quiet. Doors closed, curtains drew. This was how border towns handled their problems, in the open, with witnesses who would later claim they saw nothing. Kyle measured his options. He could back down, but that would only delay this confrontation. He could fight, but that would confirm everything they believed about him. There was no right answer, only degrees of wrong. Then Lena Hart's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Cass Miller, are you threatening a man for the crime of building a cabin? She stood in the doorway of the general store, her father behind her. Every eye on the street turned toward her. Cass's face reddened. Miss Hart, this doesn't concern you. It concerns me when I watch 4 armed men corner one. That's not justice, it's cowardice. She stepped fully into the street, her posture fearless in a way that made Kyle's heart clench. And for your information, I don't need Mr. Rourke to give me ideas. I came by those honestly, watching men like you mistake bullying for strength. You're making a mistake, Cass warned. No, you are, Lena's voice carried across the street. You're so terrified of change, of anything that challenges your tiny version of how things should be, that you'd rather drive out anyone different than question your own assumptions. That's not protection. That's just fear dressed up in self-righteousness. Lena, her father said quietly, let's go. But she wasn't finished. Mr. Rourke has done nothing wrong. He's building a home. He's keeping to himself. He's causing no trouble. If that threatens you, the problem isn't him. It's you. The silence that followed had weight. Kael could see the calculations happening behind Cass's eyes, the desire to lash out warring with the knowledge that striking a woman would cost him whatever moral authority he claimed. Finally, Cass stepped back. "This isn't over." "It never is with people like you," Lena said, "but at least now everyone knows what kind of man you are." Cass and his companions retreated to the saloon. The street slowly returned to life, conversations resuming with the careful volume of people pretending nothing had happened. Ethan Hart approached Kael, his face lined with worry. "I apologize for my daughter. She speaks her mind, but—" "Don't." Kael met his eyes. "Don't apologize for her having courage. Courage gets people hurt out here. So does cowardice. At least courage means something." Lena joined them, her cheeks flushed but her jaw set. "I won't apologize either." I didn't ask you to," Kael said, "but you need to understand what you did back there. It changes things. Cass Miller isn't the type to forget or forgive. He'll come at you now, trying to prove he was right about me. Then he can try." Her eyes met his, and in them Kael saw something he'd lost years ago, absolute certainty of purpose. "I'm tired of watching good people be silent while cruel ones set the rules. If defending you makes me a target, so be it. You don't know me well enough to put yourself at risk." "I know enough." She touched his arm briefly, a gesture that somehow felt more intimate than anything Kael had experienced in years. "I know you're trying to build something. I know you're haunted by what you've destroyed. I know you came here looking for peace, not glory. That's more than enough." Ethan sighed. "We should go. Both of you should probably avoid town for a while." But as they separated, Lena and her father to the boarding house, Kael to his cabin, everyone knew that avoiding wouldn't solve anything. The confrontation had been postponed, not prevented, and in towns like Dry Hollow, postponement just gave anger time to ferment into something worse. The river and its secrets. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, Lena continued to visit Broken Creek. She came with books and conversation, with technical advice and comfortable silence. They fell into a pattern. Kael would work on the cabin while she read or sketched the landscape, and as the sun dropped toward the horizon, they'd walk to the creek and talk. Those creekside conversations became the center of Kael's days. They talked about everything and nothing, her mother's death, and how grief changes shape but never weight, his childhood in a mountain town that no longer existed, the strange mathematics of trying to build a life from pieces that don't quite fit. "Do you believe people can really change?" Lena asked one evening, her feet dangling in the cool water. "I have to," Kael said. "Otherwise everything I'm doing here is just theater." "That's not an answer. That's a necessity." He considered. "I think people can change their actions. Whether that changes who they are fundamentally, I don't know. Maybe we're all just performing better versions of our worst selves." "That's bleak." "That's experience." Lena threw a stone into the water, watching the ripples spread. "My mother believed in essential goodness. She'd look at a building that had been neglected, walls crumbling, foundation cracking, and she'd see not what it was, but what it could be again. She called it seeing through the damage to the design." "And you? Do you see that way?" "I'm trying to learn." She turned to look at him. "When I look at you, I see someone who's chosen to put down weapons and pick up tools. That's not performance. That's transformation. Or it's just exhaustion. Those aren't mutually exclusive," she smiled. "Sometimes we change because we're too tired to stay the same." They sat in companionable quiet as the evening painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Kael felt something unfurling in his chest, a sensation he eventually identified as hope, though he barely trusted it. "The town's going to make this harder," he said quietly. "I know. Your father's already worried, and Cass Miller isn't the type to let things go." "I know that too." Lena pulled her feet from the water, turned to face him fully. "But here's what you need to understand, Kael. I didn't survive my mother's death by playing it safe. I survived by deciding what mattered and holding on to it with both hands. This matters. You matter. And I'm not letting fear dictate my choices. It's not about fear, it's about reality. Reality is negotiable." Her eyes held his. My mother used to say that buildings exist because someone looked at empty space and decided it didn't have to stay empty. The same is true for lives. Just because this town has decided you're dangerous doesn't make it true. Just because they've decided we shouldn't be friends doesn't mean we aren't. Is that what we are? Friends? The question hung between them, carrying more weight than its simplicity suggested. Lena's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across her face before she steadied it. I think we're two people who recognize something in each other, she said carefully. Two people trying to outrun ghosts. Whether that's friendship or something else, I don't know yet, but I'd like the chance to find out. Kale felt the ground shifting beneath him, the careful isolation he'd constructed beginning to crack. It would be smarter to end this now, to protect both of them by creating distance. But smart had never been his strong suit, and sitting beside Lena in the fading light, he discovered he was tired of being smart. I'd like that too, he said. Her smile was like sunrise, gradual, then all at once. They talked until full dark, until the stars mapped themselves across the sky and the creek's whisper became the loudest sound in the world. When Lena finally mounted her horse to leave, she paused. Kyle? Yeah? Thank you for not treating me like I'm fragile. My father does, because he's terrified of losing me the way he lost her. The town does, because I'm young and female and Eastern. But you argue with me, challenge my ideas, trust me to make my own choices. That's the greatest gift you could give. She rode away before he could respond, leaving Kyle standing in the darkness, feeling like something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how he saw her, but in how he saw the possibility of his own life. Maybe transformation wasn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it was about letting someone see who you'd been trying to be all along. The storm gathers. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange duality. On the surface, nothing changed. Kyle worked on his cabin, slowly transforming it from shelter to home. Lena visited regularly, their conversations deepening from friendly to something neither quite named. Ethan Hart focused on his surveying work, mapping the borderlands with the meticulous care of someone who believed documentation could prevent conflict. But beneath the surface, pressure built. Cass Miller's resentment fermented into active campaigning. He moved through town like a politician, stopping at the saloon, the church, the general store, anywhere men gathered. His message was simple and effective. Kyle Rourke was dangerous. The Hart girl was naive, and allowing their association would lead to trouble with the native tribes who already resented settler encroachment. It didn't matter that this was speculation. It didn't matter that Kyle had caused no trouble. Fear didn't need evidence. It needed permission. The campaign worked. Conversation stopped when Kyle entered the general store. Supplies became mysteriously limited. Ethan Hart noticed clients canceling surveying contracts without explanation. Lena faced whispers and pointed looks from women who'd previously been cordial. The isolation tightened like a noose. They're trying to starve us out, Ethan said one evening, sitting with Kyle outside the cabin. Lena had gone to fetch water from the creek, giving the men time to talk. I'm sorry, Kyle said. This is because of me. It's because of them, Ethan corrected. Because they'd rather enforce conformity than tolerate difference. But he paused, weighing his words. I'm worried about Lena. She's so certain of herself, so willing to stand against the tide. That courage is admirable, but it's also dangerous. She gets that from you. She gets it from her mother. Ethan's voice carried old pain. Catherine was the same way, saw injustice and couldn't stay silent. It got her work shut down in Philadelphia. Too many contractors didn't want to take direction from a woman. The stress, the constant fighting, he broke off. I'm not saying it killed her, but it didn't help. And now you're afraid the same thing will happen to Lena. I'm afraid this town will break her spirit, or worse. Ethan met Kyle's eyes. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you have feelings for my daughter? The question landed like a stone. Kyle had been avoiding asking himself the same thing, knowing the answer would complicate everything. I care about her, he said carefully. She's become important to me. That's not what I asked. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he finally said, I have feelings for her, but I've been trying not to, because I know what it would mean. For her. For you. For any chance she has at a normal life in this place. And what does Lena think? I don't know. We haven't talked about it. Ethan nodded slowly. Here's what I think. I think my daughter is falling in love with you, whether she's admitted it to herself or not. I think she sees in you something she needs, proof that change is possible, that people can choose to be better than their worst moments. And I think, he paused, I think you might be falling for her too. That would be a mistake. Why? Because you have a past? Because people in town disapprove? Because it's complicated? Ethan's voice gentled. KL, everything worth having is complicated. Catherine and I, we faced opposition from both our families. Her parents thought I wasn't ambitious enough. Mine thought she was too unconventional. But we built something anyway. Something real. Something that lasted until the day she died. And after she was gone, after was hard. After was learning to breathe again. But I don't regret a single moment we had. Ethan stood, preparing to leave. I'm not giving you permission or blessing. I'm just saying, don't let fear make your choices. We've all done that enough already. He walked toward the creek to find Lena, leaving Kyle alone with thoughts that wouldn't settle. Was it possible? Could something real grow in this hostile soil? Or was he just being selfish, reaching for something he had no right to claim? He didn't have answers. But sitting in the deepening dark, listening to Lena's laughter carry from the creek where she and her father talked, Kyle felt something he'd thought was dead. The possibility of wanting something beyond simple survival. The possibility of wanting to live. The line is drawn. The confrontation came on a Wednesday afternoon, sudden as summer lightning. Lena had ridden a broken creek to bring Kale supplies from a merchant in Redemption Springs, a shop outside Cass Miller's sphere of influence. They were unloading flour and coffee when 4 riders approached. Cass led them, his face carved from anger and certainty. Behind him came the dough-faced man from the previous confrontation, plus 2 others Kyle recognized from town, ranch hands who'd probably been promised drinks or money or the satisfaction of enforcing order. Kyle stepped forward, positioning himself between the riders and Lena. Gentlemen, this ends today, Cass said without preamble. We've been patient, we've been understanding, but you've crossed the line. What line? Corrupting that girl. Cass gestured at Lena, filling her head with ideas, making her think she can just ignore how things work out here. Her father's losing contracts because of you. The whole town's talking. It's time you moved on. I'm not moving anywhere. That wasn't a request. Cass dismounted, his companions following suit. We're here to help you pack, one way or another. Lena pushed past Kale. You have no authority to— Miss Hart, you need to step aside. Cass didn't look at her, his focus locked on Kale. This is between men. Like hell it is, Lena's voice carried across the space. I'm not some prize you're fighting over. I'm a person making my own choices, and I choose to be here. You choose wrong. No, you're wrong. She moved to stand beside Kyle, her shoulder almost touching his. You're wrong about him, wrong about me, wrong about what strength looks like. Real strength isn't beating people into submission. It's having the courage to let them be different. Cass's expression darkened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Good. Lena's chin lifted. I want it to be hard. I want you to feel the weight of what you're doing, trying to destroy a man's life because he doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable. One of Cass's companions stepped forward. Boss, maybe we should— Shut up. Cass's hand moved toward his gun. Rourke, you've got one chance. Ride out today, and we'll let you go peaceable. Stay, and we make you leave. Kale felt the familiar coldness settle over him, the pre-violence clarity he'd hoped never to experience again. He could see how this would play out. 4 armed men, anger making them reckless. They'd try to intimidate him into a fight, and when he defended himself, they'd call it provocation. The town would back them. Justice would be whatever story they told. But standing beside Lena, feeling her determination like heat, Kale discovered something. He was tired of running, tired of letting fear dictate his choices, tired of accepting that he deserved isolation. No, he said quietly. No? No, I'm not leaving. No, you don't get to decide where I live, and no— His voice hardened. You don't get to threaten me on my own land. Cass moved fast, his fist swinging toward Kale's face. But Kale was faster, trained responses overriding peaceful intention. He blocked the punch, redirected Cass's momentum, and swept his legs out from under him. Cass hit the ground hard. His companions surged forward, and suddenly Kyle was back in the world he'd fled, violence becoming dance, bodies moving with lethal intent. He disabled the first man with a strike to the solar plexus, dropped the second with a knee to the thigh that would leave him limping for a week. The third hesitated, seeing his companions down, seeing Kale barely breathing hard. "Stop!" Lena's voice cut through the chaos. "Please, just stop!" Everyone froze. Cass pushed himself upright, blood streaming from his nose, rage painting his face. "You're dead," he gasped. "You hear me? Dead." "I hear you," Kale said, "and I'm still not leaving." Cass and his men retreated to their horses, their exit lacking all dignity. But as they rode away, Cass called back, "The sheriff will hear about this. Assault! Unprovoked attack. You're done, Rourke." The dust settled slowly. Lena turned to Kyle, her face pale. "You need to run," she said. "They'll twist this, make it seem like you started it. The law out here, it listens to men like Cass." "I'm not running." "Kale, I'm tired of running, Lena." He met her eyes. "I've been running my whole life, from war, from guilt, from the possibility of being anything other than the violence I'm good at. But standing here with you," his voice caught, "I'd rather face whatever comes than run again." She moved closer, her hands finding his. "Then we face it together. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I chose to see you as human rather than as threat. It became my fight when I decided that courage meant more than comfort." She squeezed his hands. "You're not alone in this. You never were." Kale looked down at their joined hands, her skin pale against his weathered palms, her grip firm despite the trembling he could feel. In that moment, he understood what had been building between them wasn't just friendship or attraction. It was recognition, two people who'd lost too much, finding in each other the possibility of finding something again. "I don't know how this ends," he said quietly. "Neither do I." Lena smiled, fierce and beautiful. "But at least we'll find out together." They stood in the fading afternoon light, hands clasped, while the shadows lengthened and the desert wind carried the smell of coming change. Whatever happened next, whatever price they'd have to pay for choosing each other over the town's approval, they'd face it standing side by side. The storm was coming. But for the first time in years, Kyle wasn't facing it alone. The sheriff arrived at dawn, his horse kicking up dust that caught the early light like scattered gold. Kyle was already awake, had been for hours, sitting on the porch of his half-finished cabin with coffee gone cold in his cup. He'd known this was coming. In border towns, justice moved at the speed of whoever held the most influence. Sheriff Tom Bridger was a lean man in his 50s, with a face that suggested he'd seen enough to stop being surprised by human nature. He dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate, hands visible and empty of threat. "Mr. Rourke." "Sheriff." "You know why I'm here." "I can guess." Bridger approached the porch, stopping at a respectful distance. "Cass Miller filed a complaint. Says you attacked him and 3 others unprovoked. Says you put 2 men in the doctor's office with injuries that'll keep them down for a week." "That what Cass says?" "That's what 4 witnesses say." Bridger's eyes were tired. "You got a different version?" "I do. They rode out here threatening to run me off my land. Cass threw the first punch. I defended myself." "Any witnesses to your version?" "Miss Hart was here." Bridger's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been sympathy. "The girl you're courting." "I'm not courting anyone. We're friends." "That's not what the town thinks. And in places like Dry Hollow, perception tends to matter more than fact." The sheriff pulled out a paper from his coat. "I've got a warrant here for disturbing the peace and assault. You need to come with me." Kale set down his cup. "And if I don't? Then I arrest you by force, and things get uglier than they need to be." Bridger's voice carried weary pragmatism. "Look, I know how this works. I know Cass Miller's got half the town believing you're some kind of dangerous outsider. I also know he's a bully who picks fights and calls them justice. But the law's the law, even when it's being used wrong. So I'm guilty before I even stand trial?" You're inconvenient. Out here, that's usually the same thing. Bridger shifted his weight. But here's what I can offer. You come peaceable. We do this by the book. I'll make sure you get a fair hearing before Judge Morrison. He's not perfect, but he's not in Cass's pocket either. You might actually get justice. Might. That's the best I can promise. Cale looked out across his land. The cabin he'd built board by board. The creek that caught morning light like promise. The scrub grass that somehow survived in soil that wanted nothing to grow. He'd built something here. Not much, but his. And now men who couldn't stand the idea of him having even this small piece were going to take it away. But running would only confirm everything they believed. And somewhere in town, Lena Hart was probably already fighting for him, her courage a bright, reckless thing that made his own careful survival feel like cowardice. All right, Cale said. I'll come. Smart choice. Bridger pulled out iron shackles. I have to put these on. It's procedure. The metal clicked around Cale's wrists with a sound like finality. He climbed onto the sheriff's spare horse, and they rode toward Dry Hollow as the sun climbed higher, burning away the cool mercy of morning. The town watched them arrive with the hungry attention of spectators at an execution. Windows filled with faces, doors opened just enough for whispered commentary. Children were pulled inside, as if Khal's presence might contaminate them with some invisible violence. The jail sat behind the sheriff's office, 2 cells separated by iron bars, windows too small for escape, the smell of old fear and older mistakes. Bridger unlocked one cell, removed the shackles, and gestured Khal inside. Hearing set for tomorrow afternoon, Bridger said. Judge Morrison's riding in from Redemption Springs. I'll make sure you get food and water. Appreciate it. Don't thank me yet. Bridger hesitated at the door. For what it's worth, I don't think you're what Cass Miller says you are. But I've been wrong before. He left, locking the outer door behind him. Khal sat on the cell's narrow cot, listening to the town beyond the walls. Conversations that rose and fell like water. Laughter that felt cruel in its obliviousness. The ordinary sounds of life continuing while he sat trapped in consequence. Hours passed. The sun tracked across the sky, visible only as changing angles of light through the high window. Khal tried not to think about the hearing, about what 4 witnesses could do to a truth that only 2 people knew. He tried not to imagine Lena's face when she heard about his arrest, the way she'd probably stormed through town demanding they release him, making herself even more of a target. The outer door opened. Footsteps approached, lighter than the sheriff's, faster, carrying urgency like perfume. Lena appeared at his cell, her face flushed from running, her eyes bright with anger and something that looked like fear. You shouldn't be here, Khal said. I shouldn't be anywhere else. She gripped the bars. The sheriff told me what happened. Cass and his men are spreading their version all over town. They're saying you went crazy, that you attacked them like some kind of animal, that it's proof you're dangerous. Let them say what they want. I won't let them. Her voice cracked slightly. I've been talking to everyone who'll listen, telling them the truth, reminding them that you've done nothing but try to build a peaceful life. But Khal, she paused. They don't want to hear it. They want to believe Cass because believing you would mean questioning everything they've decided about who belongs and who doesn't. Then maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here. Stop it. Lena's hands tightened on the bars. Don't you dare give up. Don't you dare let them win by deciding you're not worth fighting for. It's not about me being worth it. It's about you being safe. I don't want to be safe. The words came out almost as a shout. I want to be honest. I want to live in a world where choosing to see someone's humanity isn't an act of rebellion. And I want... She stopped, her breath catching. What do you want, Lena? She met his eyes through the bars, and in her gaze Khal saw everything they'd been carefully not saying. All the feeling that had built between them in creekside conversations and shared silences. In the way she looked at him like he was more than his worst moments. In the way he'd started imagining a future that included more than just survival. I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the judge decides, you're not alone in this. Her voice steadied. I'm not running, I'm not hiding, and I'm not letting them make you disappear. Lena, if you keep defending me, they'll turn on you completely. Your father's already losing work. How much worse are you willing to let it get? As bad as it needs to. She reached through the bars, her hand finding his. My mother used to say that buildings reveal who we are by what we're willing to carry. The same is true for people. I'm willing to carry this. I'm willing to carry you, if you'll let me. Cale felt something break open in his chest, some carefully maintained wall between what he wanted and what he thought he deserved. Her hand in his felt like an anchor, like proof that he wasn't just the violence he'd committed or the guilt he carried. He was also this moment, this connection, this impossible thing growing between them despite every reasonable objection. I don't know how to let someone do that, he said quietly. Then learn. She smiled through tears he hadn't seen forming. We'll figure it out together. The outer door opened again. The sheriff cleared his throat. Miss Hart, visiting time's over. 5 more minutes, Lena said without looking away from Kyle. 2. And that's pushing my generosity. She nodded, then leaned closer to the bars. Tomorrow, at the hearing, tell the truth. All of it. Don't try to protect me by leaving parts out. The only way through this is complete honesty. What if honesty isn't enough? Then at least we'll know we tried. She squeezed his hand once more, then released it. I'll see you tomorrow. And Kyle, whatever happens, thank you. For what? For reminding me what courage looks like. She left before he could respond, her footsteps fading into the sound of the town beyond. Cale sat in the dimming light, her words echoing in the small space, and felt something he'd almost forgotten, hope sharp enough to hurt. The afternoon crawled by. Evening came with the smell of cooking fires and the sound of a town settling into routine. Bridger brought him dinner, stew and bread, better than expected, and news that made Cale's stomach tighten. Cass Miller's been talking to Judge Morrison, the sheriff said. Nothing official, just friendly conversation. But the judge is staying at Cass's ranch tonight instead of at the boarding house like usual. So much for impartial justice. I didn't say it was right. I'm just telling you how it is. Bridger set the food through a slot in the bars. You got anyone else who can speak for you? Besides Miss Hart. Her father was there too. He saw Cass and his men ride up. Hart's a good man, but he's an outsider too. Judge might not give his word much weight. Bridger rubbed his face. Look, I shouldn't be saying this, but you might want to consider a compromise. Plead guilty to disturbing the peace, pay a fine, agree to leave town. Morrison might go for that. It would solve everyone's problem. Everyone except me and Lena. She'll get over it. Girls her age, they move on. You don't know her very well. Maybe not. Bridger moved toward the door. But I know how border justice works. The law out here bends toward whoever can apply the most pressure. And right now, that's Cass Miller and the men who think like him. He left Kyle alone with cooling stew and the knowledge that tomorrow would likely confirm everything he'd learned about how the world worked, that power mattered more than truth, that being right rarely protected you from being punished. But somewhere in town, Lena Hart was probably still fighting for him, her courage a bright, defiant flame against the darkness. And that had to count for something, even if the judge's verdict went the other way. Night fell completely. Through the high window, Kyle could see stars appearing one by one, the same stars that had watched over him through years of war and wandering. They offered no answers, no comfort, just their cold, distant light. But somehow, that felt right. The universe didn't owe him justice. It didn't owe him anything. All he could do was face what came and try to meet it with the same courage Lena showed every day just by choosing to see him as human. Morning arrived too quickly. Bridger brought coffee and biscuits, his face carefully neutral. Hearing's at 2 o'clock. In the church. It's the only building big enough for the crowd. There's going to be a crowd? Half the town wants to watch. The other half wants to testify. Bridger unlocked the cell. I'm going to take you there early, get you settled before things get heated. They walked through streets that felt like accusation. People stopped talking when they passed. Children pointed until their parents pulled their hands down. By the time they reached the church, Kyle felt the weight of collective judgment pressing down like physical force. The church was simple. Wooden pews, a raised platform where the preacher usually stood, windows that let in light but not mercy. Judge Morrison was already there, a heavy-set man with intelligent eyes and the air of someone who'd spent his life making hard decisions and living with the consequences. Mr. Rourke, he said, I'm Judge Morrison. This is an informal hearing to determine if there's sufficient cause to hold you for trial on charges of assault. You understand the proceedings? I do. You have a right to speak on your own behalf and to present witnesses. The plaintiff, in this case, Mr. Cass Miller, will present his version of events first. The church began to fill. Cass arrived with his 3 companions, their faces bearing the marks of the fight, split lip, black eye, a bandage over one man's temple. They sat in the front row like they owned the building. Behind them came others who looked at Kyle with either fear or satisfaction, depending on what story they'd chosen to believe. Then Lena entered, her father beside her, and the room's energy shifted. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, her spine absolutely straight. She found Kyle's eyes across the crowded space and nodded once, a gesture that somehow contained entire conversations. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order. Mr. Miller, present your case. Cass stood, his performance practiced. He described riding out to Broken Creek with peaceful intentions, just wanting to talk sense into a man who was causing division in town. He painted Kyle as unstable, dangerous, prone to violence at the slightest provocation. We approached friendly-like, Cass said. Just wanted to have a conversation, but before we could even speak our piece, Rourke attacked. No warning, no reason, just came at us like he was back in whatever war made him crazy. His companions corroborated, their stories matching too perfectly, like lines learned from a script. They described Kyle as feral, unreasonable, a threat that needed to be removed before someone got seriously hurt. Judge Morrison listened without expression, occasionally making notes. When they finished, he turned to Kyle. Your response? Kyle stood. He could feel every eye in the church on him, feel the weight of their already formed conclusions. But he thought of Lena's words. Tell the truth, all of it, and decided that if he was going to lose, at least he'd lose honestly. They're lying, he said simply. They rode out to my land with the explicit intention of driving me off. Cass Miller threw the first punch. I defended myself. That's the whole truth. Can anyone corroborate your version? I can. Lena stood, her voice clear. I was there. I witnessed everything. Miss Hart, Judge Morrison's tone carried warning. Are you certain you want to involve yourself in this? I'm already involved. I've been involved since the day I decided Mr. Rourke deserved the same basic respect we grant everyone else. She stepped into the aisle. Cass Miller and his men came to Broken Creek looking for a fight. They threatened Mr. Rourke. They tried to intimidate him into leaving. When that didn't work, Cass attacked. Everything Mr. Rourke did was self-defense. She's lying to protect him, Cass called out. Everyone knows she's been spending time out there, probably got feelings for him. Her testimony's worthless. My testimony is honest, Lena shot back, which is more than can be said for yours. The church erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison hammered his gavel. Order. I'll have order or I'll clear this building. The noise subsided. Morrison looked between Kale and Cass, his expression unreadable. This is a complicated situation. We have conflicting testimonies, and the complicating factor of, he paused delicately, personal relationships that may color perception. There's nothing complicated about it, Lena said. 4 armed men rode onto one man's property and threatened him. He defended himself. Under any reasonable interpretation of law, that's not assault, it's survival. Miss Hart, you're very passionate, but passion isn't evidence. Morrison's gaze moved across the crowded church. Does anyone else have testimony to offer? Silence. Kyle could see people looking away, unwilling to get involved, unwilling to choose sides in a conflict that might cost them socially or economically. This was how justice died, not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet cowardice. Then Ethan Hart stood. Your Honor, I wasn't present for the fight itself, but I was at the general store the week before when Cass Miller and his men cornered Mr. Rourke, threatened him, told him he wasn't welcome in Dry Hollow. I heard them say, and I quote, "You'll leave peaceable or we'll make you leave." That establishes a pattern of intimidation that supports my daughter's testimony about their intentions. Morrison made a note. Mr. Hart, you're an outsider yourself. Some might say you have bias. I'm a surveyor and mapmaker. My entire profession depends on accurate observation and honest reporting. I'm telling you what I saw and heard. Ethan's voice carried quiet strength. And what I've seen in Dry Hollow is a town more interested in enforcing conformity than pursuing justice. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem. Ethan didn't back down. My daughter and I came here hoping to find a community. Instead, we found a place where fear dictates policy and difference is treated as threat. If that's the kind of town you want Dry Hollow to be, then by all means rule against Mr. Rourke, but understand what you're endorsing. The church was absolutely silent now. Judge Morrison leaned back, steepling his fingers, his face showing the weight of decision. "This court will take a brief recess," he said. "I need to consider the testimonies." He disappeared into a side room. The church exploded into conversation, arguments and accusations, people choosing sides or defending their previous choices. Cale sat quietly, feeling the moment balance on a knife's edge. Lena made her way to him, ignoring the stares and whispers. "Whatever happens, we told the truth. Your father didn't have to do that." "Yes, he did." She glanced back at Ethan, who was facing down Cass Miller's angry questions with calm dignity. "He's been playing small since my mother died, trying not to make waves. But I think watching me fight reminded him who he used to be. You're both taking huge risks." "Good." Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining despite the public setting. "Maybe it's time this town learned that some things are worth risking for." Before Cale could respond, Judge Morrison returned. The crowd settled immediately, sensing the weight of what was coming. "I've considered the testimonies," Morrison began, "and I've come to a decision. The charges against Cale Rourke are dismissed." The church erupted. Cass was on his feet, shouting protests. Others were cheering or arguing or demanding explanation. Morrison hammered his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "Let me be clear," he continued. "This dismissal isn't because I believe Mr. Rourke is innocent. It's because the evidence is insufficient and contradictory. We have 4 witnesses saying one thing, 2 saying another. Without additional evidence, I can't in good conscience rule either way. Therefore, the charges are dismissed without prejudice." "That's not justice," Cass roared. "You're letting him walk because of some girl's pretty words." "I'm following the law, Mr. Miller, something you might consider doing yourself next time you decide to take matters into your own hands." Morrison's voice hardened. "But let me add this. Mr. Rourke, you're free to go. But I strongly suggest you reconsider your presence in Dry Hollow. This town clearly doesn't want you here. Staying will only lead to more conflict." "Are you ordering me to leave?" Kyle asked. "I'm advising it. There's a difference." Morrison began gathering his papers. "But if you choose to stay, understand that I won't always be here to weigh testimony. Next time something happens, and there will be a next time, you might not get this outcome." The hearing ended. People filed out, some satisfied, most frustrated that no clear victor had emerged. Cass and his men left quickly, their anger palpable. Others lingered, watching Kyle like he was a problem they hadn't quite solved. Bridger removed the chains. "You're free to go, but take the judge's advice seriously." Kyle nodded, but he was looking at Lena. She stood surrounded by women from town, their faces showing various degrees of disapproval and concern. He could hear fragments of their conversation, warnings about her reputation, concerns for her future, predictions that associating with him would ruin any chance she had at happiness in Dry Hollow. She listened politely, then stepped away from them and walked directly to Kyle. "Ready to go home?" she asked. The simplicity of the question, the way she said home like his cabin was already a shared space rather than his solitary refuge, made something in Kyle's chest tighten. "Lena, maybe they're right. Maybe I should leave. And maybe I should care what they think." She took his arm. "But I don't. So let's go home and finish building that roof. It's supposed to rain next week, and I'd rather not get wet while I'm reading." They walked out of the church together, into afternoon light that felt different somehow, sharper, more real, like something had been decided that went beyond the judge's ruling. Behind them, Dry Hollow watched and judged and whispered. But ahead, the road stretched toward Broken Creek, toward the half-finished cabin, and the creek that whispered secrets and the possibility of something neither of them had expected to find. The ride back was quiet, but not uncomfortable. They didn't need words for what had happened in that church, the way Lena had stood against the tide, the way her father had found his voice again, the way justice had been served even if it felt incomplete and fragile. When they reached this cabin, Ethan was waiting. He'd ridden out ahead of them, and now he stood on the porch looking older than his years, but somehow more solid, like he'd remembered how to carry weight. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "I thought I'd help with the roof. Lena tells me you're running behind schedule." Cale dismounted. "You don't have to—" "I know, but I want to." Ethan met his eyes. "I've spent 2 years avoiding conflict, trying to make myself acceptable to people who were never going to accept me. Watching you and Lena, it reminded me that sometimes the only way forward is through." They worked until sunset, 3 people rebuilding not just a roof, but something less tangible. With every board laid, every nail driven, they were constructing a resistance against the fear that wanted to drive them apart. The work was hard and satisfying, and when they finally stopped, the cabin looked less like shelter and more like home. Ethan left as darkness fell, promising to return the next day. Lena lingered on the porch, watching stars emerge. "They're not going to give up," she said quietly. "Cass and the others. Today just made them angrier." "I know. And staying here, continuing to see each other, it's going to get harder." "I know that too." She turned to face him, her expression serious in the dimming light. "So I need you to tell me honestly, is this worth it to you? Am I worth it?" Cale had faced that question before, in 100 different forms. Is peace worth fighting for? Is change worth the cost? Is hope worth the risk of disappointment? He'd answered no so many times, had chosen safety over possibility, isolation over connection. But standing on this porch, looking at Lena Hart with her fierce courage and her refusal to accept the world's limitations, he found a different answer. "You're worth everything," he said. "You're worth staying, worth fighting, worth whatever comes next." She stepped closer, her hand finding his chest where his heart hammered against his ribs. "Then we stay. We fight. We show this town that fear doesn't get to win. And if we lose, then at least we lose together." She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and brief, a promise more than passion. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears and defiance. "Tomorrow will bring what it brings," she said. "But tonight, we know what we're fighting for." She mounted her horse and rode toward town, leaving Cale standing in the darkness with the taste of her kiss on his lips and the certainty that everything had changed. The hearing hadn't ended anything. It had only clarified the battle lines. On one side stood fear, tradition, the comfortable certainty of exclusion. On the other stood 2 people who'd decided that love was worth more than acceptance. The night deepened. Somewhere in town, Cass Miller was probably plotting his next move. Somewhere, people were talking about the spectacle in the church, about the outsider girl who'd chosen the wrong man, about the warrior who wouldn't learn his place. But here at Broken Creek, in the cabin he'd built with his own hands, Cale felt something he'd thought was lost forever. The belief that tomorrow might be worth seeing, not because it would be easy, but because he wouldn't face it alone. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. The creek whispered its timeless song. And in the space between darkness and dawn, Kyle Rourke allowed himself to imagine a future that included more than survival. He imagined a life worth living. The fragile peace lasted exactly 5 days. 5 days of Kyle working on the cabin while Lena visited openly, no longer pretending their connection was anything less than what it had become. 5 days of Ethan Hart losing 2 more surveying contracts, but refusing to acknowledge the pressure mounting against them. 5 days of the town, watching, waiting, building resentment like kindling, waiting for a spark. The spark came on Saturday night. Kyle had ridden into town for lamp oil and coffee, basic supplies he couldn't make himself. The general store was nearly empty, the shopkeeper's eyes full of apology as he took Kyle's money with hands that trembled slightly. Outside, the street was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that felt like held breath. He should have recognized the warning, should have mounted his horse and ridden straight back to Broken Creek. But years of war had taught him that running from trouble often just meant getting shot in the back, so he walked to the water trough to let his horse drink before the journey home. That's when Cass Miller stepped out of the alley. He wasn't alone. 6 men flanked him this time, not the original 4. They'd recruited reinforcements, men whose faces Cale recognized from the hearing, ranchers and shopkeepers who'd watched the judge's ruling with barely concealed anger, men who'd decided that if the law wouldn't remove the problem, they'd handle it themselves. Rourke, Cass's voice carried across the empty street. We need to have a conversation. We've had plenty of conversations. Not like this one. Cass moved closer, his companions forming a loose semicircle that blocked the obvious escape routes. See, the judge might have let you go. But that doesn't change facts. You don't belong here. You're poison to this town, and poison needs to be cut out before it spreads. Cale measured the distances, the angles, the probability of violence. 7 against 1. Not impossible odds, but bad enough that winning would mean hurting people badly, maybe permanently. And that would only prove everything they believed about him. I'm not looking for trouble, Cale said carefully. Then you should have left when you had the chance. Another man spoke, the one with the dough-soft face, his nose still crooked from their previous encounter. You should have taken the hint, but you got cocky. Thought because you put a few of us down, because you got that Eastern girl defending you, that meant you could stay. Nobody's got me cocky. I'm just trying to live. Not here, you're not. Cass was close enough now that Cale could smell whiskey on his breath, see the rigid certainty in his eyes. We gave you every opportunity to do this easy, but you chose hard. So now we're going to make you a promise. You pack up and leave by sundown tomorrow, or things get real unpleasant. Define unpleasant. Your cabin burns, your horse disappears. Maybe that creek you're so fond of gets poisoned. Maybe accidents start happening to people who defend you. Cass's smile had no warmth. We're done being nice about this. Cale felt the old coldness settle over him, the pre-violence clarity where everything slowed down and sharpened. He could see exactly how this would go. They wanted him to swing first, wanted provocation they could turn into justification. And if he didn't swing, they'd push until he had no choice. I'm not leaving, he said quietly. Then you're a fool. Maybe, but I'm a fool with property rights and the law on my side. The law? Cass laughed, harsh and bitter. The law's 100 miles away when it matters. Out here, the only law that counts is what we make ourselves, and we've decided you're done. One of the other men stepped forward, older, with a rancher's weathered face and eyes like flint. You got one chance, boy. Walk away from that Hart girl, pack your things, and ride out. Do that, and we'll let you go peaceable. And if I don't? Then we stop being patient. The rancher's hand drifted toward his gun. We've all lost sleep over you. Lost business because people think we're soft for letting you stay. Lost respect because you made fools of some of us. That debt needs paying. Cale's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. He could fight, probably take down 3 or 4 before they overwhelmed him. He could run, but that would only delay this confrontation. He could try to talk them down, but their expressions showed that words had stopped mattering. Then a voice cut through the tension like a knife. Step away from him. Lena stood at the edge of the street, holding a shotgun that looked too big for her frame. But her grip was steady, and the barrel pointed directly at Cass Miller's chest. Miss Hart, Cass's voice carried forced patience. This doesn't concern you. Everything concerning Cale concerns me. She moved closer, the shotgun never wavering. So I'll say it again. Step away from him, or I start shooting. You won't shoot anyone. But Cass's voice had lost some of its certainty. Try me. Lena's face was absolutely calm, which somehow made her threat more credible. My mother taught me to shoot when I was 12. She said women needed to know how to protect what mattered to them. Right now, nothing matters more than making sure you and your friends understand that threatening Cale means threatening me. You're making a mistake, the rancher said, choosing this outsider over your own kind. My kind? Lena's voice dripped scorn. My kind are people with courage and conscience. You don't qualify. Ethan Hart appeared behind her, carrying his own rifle. His face showed fear, but also a kind of tired determination. Gentlemen, I suggest you disperse. This situation has escalated beyond reason. You're both insane. Cass took a step back, but his hand stayed near his gun. Protecting a man who's got nothing, is nothing, will never be anything but trouble. We're protecting a man who's trying to build a life despite people like you tearing it down at every opportunity. Ethan's voice strengthened. And we're protecting the principle that everyone deserves a chance, regardless of their past or your prejudices. The standoff held for a long moment. 7 armed men facing 2 people with guns and 1 unarmed man. tension balanced on a wire so thin it could snap with a breath. Kale could see the calculations happening behind Cass's eyes, weighing pride against prudence, anger against the very real possibility that this could end in gunfire. Finally, Cass spat in the dust. "This isn't over." "It never is with people like you," Lena said. "But if you come for him again, you'll have to go through me first." "Gladly." Cass's eyes were cold. "Maybe that's what it'll take for you to learn." He and his men retreated slowly, maintaining eye contact like wolves backing away from prey. When they finally turned the corner, the street seemed to exhale. Kyle felt his legs go weak, adrenaline crash following the surge. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Lena lowered the shotgun. "We've established that I don't take well to being told what I should and shouldn't do." "Lena, they threatened to burn my cabin, to poison the creek, to hurt people who defend me. That means you." Kale's voice cracked slightly. I won't let you become a target because of me." "Too late." She set the shotgun against the water trough. "I became a target the moment I chose to see you as human instead of threat. The moment I decided that love mattered more than acceptance." The word hung in the air between them. Love, spoken casually, but landing with the weight of truth. Kyle stared at her, this woman who'd walked into his life and refused to accept the limitations he'd set for himself, who'd fought for him when he'd stopped fighting for himself. "You love me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Of course I love you." She said it like it was obvious, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Why else would I be standing in the street holding a shotgun I wasn't entirely sure I could fire? Ethan cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere less public." He was right. Curtains were twitching, faces appearing in windows, the entire confrontation having been witnessed by half the town. This would spread like wildfire, would become ammunition for everyone who wanted to drive them out. They rode back to Broken Creek together, 3 horses moving through darkness lit only by stars and a moon that seemed too indifferent for the moment's wait. When they reached the cabin, Ethan excused himself to check the perimeter, giving Kale and Lena privacy that felt both needed and terrifying. "You can't love me," Kyle said once they were alone. "You barely know me." "I know enough." Lena sat on the porch steps, patting the space beside her. "I know you've spent years punishing yourself for things you did in war. I know you came here looking for peace but found judgment instead. I know you're the kindest man I've ever met, despite having every reason to be bitter and closed." "Kind?" The word felt foreign. "Lena, I've killed people. Not in self-defense, not accidentally. I was a soldier, and soldiers kill. That's not kind, that's just controlled violence." "Was. Past tense." She took his hand. "You're not that person anymore. Or rather, you're choosing not to be. That choice, that constant decision to build instead of destroy, that's what I see. That's what I love. What if I can't maintain it? What if one day something pushes me and I revert back? Then I'll be there to remind you who you're choosing to be." Her grip tightened. "Kyle, I'm not naive. I'm not some innocent girl with romantic notions about fixing broken men. I know you're complicated. I know you carry damage. But I also know that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections you can live with, whose wounds you can tend, whose growth you can support. That's a lot of work. Good thing I'm not afraid of work." She leaned against his shoulder. "My mother used to say that relationships are like buildings. They require constant maintenance, regular inspection, and the willingness to repair problems before they become structural failures. I'm willing to put in that work. The question is, are you?" Kyle looked out at the land he'd claimed, at the cabin he'd built, at the life he'd been constructing one careful decision at a time. And he realized that all of it, all this effort to build something peaceful, had been preparation for exactly this moment. Not for solitude, but for connection. Not for isolation, but for love. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Terrified that loving you will get you hurt. Terrified that I'll fail you somehow. Terrified that Cass Miller and men like him will make good on their threats." "Good." Lena lifted her head to look at him. "Fear means you understand the stakes. Fear means you're taking this seriously. I'd be more worried if you weren't scared. So what do? We keep building. We keep fighting. We keep proving that courage and love are stronger than fear and hate. She stood, pulling him up with her. And tomorrow we ride into town together, openly, and we show them that their threats didn't work. That's insane. No, that's necessary. Her eyes blazed in the moonlight. If we hide, if we give them even an inch, they'll take miles. But if we stand together, if we refuse to be ashamed or afraid, maybe, just maybe, we change something. Ethan returned from his perimeter check, his face grave. There are riders on the horizon, 4 of them, holding back but definitely watching. Cass's men, K.L. said, making sure we know they're serious. Then we need a plan. Ethan looked between them. Because this isn't going away. They've committed now. Either we find a way to defuse this, or it escalates to violence. I could leave, K.L. said. Just pack up and go. That would solve everything. No. Lena's voice was steel. That would teach them that threats work. That violence is an acceptable solution to discomfort. I won't let that lesson stand. She's right. Ethan's agreement seemed to surprise even him. I've watched this town operate on fear and exclusion for months now. Every time someone backs down, it reinforces the pattern. Someone needs to break it. Even if breaking it means getting hurt? Even then. Ethan met Cale's eyes. My wife believed in standing for principle even when it cost her professionally, socially, sometimes physically. Watching her fight taught me something. That the only way to change systems built on fear is to refuse to be afraid. I forgot that lesson after she died. But Lena's been reminding me. They stood together in the darkness, 3 people facing impossible odds with nothing but conviction and each other. It should have felt futile. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing K.L. had done in years. All right, he said, we stand. The next morning dawned clear and bright, mocking the tension with its beauty. K.L. worked on the cabin's interior walls while Ethan stood watch, and Lena prepared food, their movements coordinated like they'd been doing this for years instead of days. The riders on the horizon never approached, but their presence was a constant pressure, a reminder that safety was temporary and violence patient. Midday brought an unexpected visitor, Sheriff Bridger, riding fast and looking troubled. We need to talk, he said without preamble. They gathered in the cabin's shade. Bridger dismounted heavily, wiping sweat from his face. Judge Morrison's gone back to Redemption Springs, he began, and the moment he left, things started heating up. Cass Miller's been organizing. He's got maybe 20 men now, all of them convinced that you're some kind of existential threat to Dry Hollow's survival. 20? Ethan paled. That's nearly a quarter of the town's adult men. And growing. Bridger looked at K.L. They're planning something. I don't know what exactly, but talk in the saloon last night was about taking care of the problem permanently. I came to warn you, you need to leave today, before this turns into something I can't control. I'm not leaving, K.L. said. Then you're signing your own death warrant. Bridger's frustration showed. I can't protect you against 20 armed men. I don't have the authority or the resources. If they come out here, they'll have to face all of us, Lena interrupted. And I promise you, Sheriff, we won't go quietly. Miss Hart, this isn't a game. This is life and death. I know exactly what it is. Her jaw set. It's the moment where we decide what kind of people we are, whether we're the kind who runs when threatened or the kind who stands for what's right even when it's dangerous. Bridger looked at her for a long moment, something like respect mixing with frustration in his expression. Your mother would be proud of you, and terrified. She'd understand, Ethan said quietly. She always understood the cost of conviction. The sheriff sighed heavily. All right, I can't stop you from being stubborn, but I can try to slow things down. Give me 24 hours. I'll ride to Redemption Springs, try to get Judge Morrison to come back and settle this officially. Maybe if there's legal oversight, Cass and his men will back down. And if they don't wait 24 hours, K.L. asked, then you'd better be ready to defend yourselves. Bridger mounted his horse, and may whatever you believe in have mercy on all of us. He rode away, dust rising behind him like a warning. The 3 of them stood in silence, feeling the weight of what was coming. We should prepare, Ethan said finally. Reinforce the cabin, gather weapons. Make sure we can defend this position if it comes to that. It'll come to that, K.L. said. Men like Cass, they've gone too far to back down now. Their pride is invested. Their status depends on following through. Then we make them regret it. Lena's voice carried a hardness that was new and startling. We show them that pushing people has consequences. They spent the afternoon preparing. Kyle and Ethan reinforced the cabin's windows and door, creating defensive positions that would make forced entry costly. Lena inventoried their weapons: 2 rifles, a shotgun, 3 pistols, and enough ammunition for a sustained fight. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. As sunset approached, they took positions. Ethan on the east side of the cabin, Lena on the west, Kyle at the door with a clear view of the approach. They waited as darkness gathered, tension building with every minute that passed without incident. The attack came at full dark. No warning, no announcement, just the sudden thunder of hoofbeats and the orange bloom of torches in the night. Kyle counted 15 riders, maybe more, their faces hidden behind bandanas, their intentions clear from the weapons they carried. "This is your last warning, Rourke," Cass's voice carried through the darkness. "Come out peaceable, or we burn you out." "This is private property," Kyle shouted back. "You're trespassing." "Property rights don't apply to men who don't belong." Another voice, the rancher from town. "You had your chance, now you get what's coming." A torch arced through the air, landing on the cabin's roof. Kyle scrambled to put it out while Ethan fired a warning shot over the riders' heads. "The next one won't be a warning," Ethan called. "Leave now, or face consequences." Laughter answered him. Another torch flew, this one hitting the cabin's wall. Kyle doused it frantically, knowing they couldn't sustain this. There were too many torches, too many riders, too much anger focused on one small structure. Lena fired the shotgun, the blast enormous in the confined space. One rider's horse reared, throwing its occupant into the dust. The others pulled back slightly, reassessing. "You want to do this?" Kyle shouted. "You want to burn down a man's home because he won't bend to your fear? Fine. But understand what you're becoming. You're not protectors. You're not righteous. You're just a mob enforcing your own cowardice." "Big words from a dead man," Cass urged his horse forward. "Last chance, Rourke. Walk out with your hands up, or we come in." Kale looked at Lena, at Ethan, at these 2 people who'd risked everything to stand with him. He could walk out, could surrender, could probably talk his way into exile instead of execution. It would save the cabin, would keep them safe. But it would also teach the lesson that violence worked, that fear was stronger than courage, that love could be intimidated into silence. "No," Kyle said, more to himself than to Cass. "I'm done running." He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "You want me? Come take me. But understand, I'm not the problem. You are. You and your fear and your desperate need to control everything that makes you uncomfortable. I'm just the excuse." Cass raised his torch. "You had your chance!" But before he could throw it, a new voice cut through the darkness. "Federal Marshal! Everyone stand down!" 2 riders emerged from the darkness behind the mob, badges gleaming in the torchlight. The lead rider was a woman in her 40s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that suggested she'd seen every variety of human stupidity and wasn't impressed by any of it. "I'm Marshal Sarah Garrett, and this mob is hereby disbanded under federal authority." Her voice carried absolute command. "Drop your weapons and disperse, or face federal charges for assault, arson, and attempted murder." "This isn't federal business," Cass protested. "This is a town matter. It became federal business when you decided to take the law into your own hands." Garrett rode closer, her hand resting on her own weapon. "I've been tracking reports of vigilante activity in this region for months. Dry Hollow keeps coming up. Seems you folks have a problem with anything that doesn't fit your narrow worldview." "That outsider is the problem," the rancher gestured at Kyle. "He's causing division, making trouble." "The only trouble I see is 20 armed men trying to burn down a cabin." Garrett's eyes swept the mob. "Now I'm going to say this once. Disperse. Go home. And if I hear about any further harassment of Mr. Rourke or the Hart family, I'll be back with enough deputies to arrest every single one of you. Am I clear?" The mob hesitated, pride warring with self-preservation. Finally, one by one, they began to retreat. Cass was the last to leave, his torch still burning, his face twisted with frustration. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Marshal Garrett said calmly. "It is. And if you're too stupid to accept that, I'll be happy to educate you in a federal prison. Cass threw his torch in the dirt and rode away, his companions following. The darkness swallowed them, leaving only the marshal and her deputy facing the cabin. Garrett dismounted. Mr. Rourke, Miss Hart, Mr. Hart, I apologize that it took us this long to intervene. Sheriff Bridger sent word to our office 3 days ago, but we were handling another situation. You came just in time, Ethan said, his voice shaking with relief. We try. Garrett looked at Cale. I need to ask, do you want to press charges? Attempted arson, assault, terroristic threats. I can make a case that would put Cass Miller away for years. Cale looked at the cabin, at the scorch marks on the wall and roof, at the faces of the people who'd stood with him. He thought about revenge, about justice, about what would actually change things. No, he said finally, charges would just make martyrs of them. Let them go home and think about what they almost became. Garrett studied him. That's generous. Maybe too generous. Maybe. But I didn't come here to wage war. I came to build peace. Sending people to prison doesn't build that. Fair enough. Garrett moved toward her horse. But understand, I'll be keeping an eye on Dry Hollow. Any more trouble, any more vigilante nonsense, and I won't ask for your permission. I'll just act. She and her deputy rode into the darkness, leaving Kyle, Lena, and Ethan standing in the silence that followed chaos. The cabin still stood, scorched but whole. They were alive, safe, together. Lena started laughing, high and slightly hysterical, the sound of someone who'd been holding their breath too long. We survived. We actually survived. We did more than survive, Ethan said. We won. But Kyle wasn't sure winning was the right word. They'd avoided immediate disaster, but the underlying problem remained. The town still feared him. Cass Miller still hated him. And nothing about tonight would change that fundamental reality. Lena seemed to read his thoughts. She crossed to him, took his face in her hands, made him look at her. Stop, she said. Stop thinking about what didn't change and recognize what did. We stood, we fought, we showed them that we won't be intimidated. That matters. Does it? They'll just try again. Maybe, but they'll have to get through us first. She kissed him, fierce and desperate and full of all the fear and relief and love she'd been holding back. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright. And I promise you, Cale Rourke, getting through me isn't easy. Ethan cleared his throat. I should probably check the roof for damage. He disappeared inside, giving them privacy. Kyle pulled Lena close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, feeling the reality of her, solid and present, and refusing to leave. I love you, he said. The words felt foreign, but right. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first day you showed up with books and started correcting my carpentry. Maybe when you stood in the street with a shotgun. But I love you, and that terrifies me more than any mob. Good. She smiled against his shoulder. Love should be terrifying. It means you understand what you have to lose. They stood holding each other while the night settled around them, while the desert wind carried away the smoke and fear, while somewhere in the darkness Dry Hollow digested what had happened and began the slow process of change or calcification. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And somehow that made even the impossible seem manageable. The morning after the attempted burning brought an uneasy quiet that felt more like intermission than resolution. Kyle stood on the porch, watching sunrise paint the desert in shades of copper and gold, his coffee cooling in his hand, his mind unable to settle. The scorch marks on the cabin wall were visible in the growing light, evidence that last night hadn't been a fever dream but a moment when everything nearly collapsed into ash. Lena had stayed the night, propriety abandoned in favor of safety. She emerged now from the cabin, her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing one of Kyle's shirts over her dress. The intimacy of the gesture, her comfort in his space, her ease with his belongings, made something in his chest tighten. You've been standing there for an hour, she said, joining him. I could hear you thinking from inside. Thinking's all I've got right now. Then share it. She took the coffee from his hand, sipped it, made a face at how cold it had gotten. Better than letting it eat you from the inside. Kyle watched the horizon, where Dry Hollow sat invisible beyond the scrub and distance. Marshal Garrett stopped them last night, But she's not staying. Eventually she rides out, and we're back where we started. Me, you, and a town that wants us gone. Except now they know we won't leave easily. Is that enough? He turned to face her. Lena, they tried to burn us out. 20 men, torches, weapons. If the marshal hadn't arrived, but she did. Lena's voice was firm. And yes, eventually she'll leave. But something changed last night. They saw that we're willing to defend ourselves, that violence against us has consequences. That matters. Or it just makes them more careful about how they come at us next time. Maybe. She set the cold coffee aside. Or maybe some of them went home and realized what they almost became. Arsonists, murderers. Maybe a few of them are ashamed this morning. Maybe that shame grows into something better. That's optimistic. That's necessary. She took his hand. If we don't believe people can change, then what are we even fighting for? The right to exist in a town full of permanent enemies? That's not a victory. That's just prolonged suffering. Ethan appeared around the corner of the cabin, his arms full of lumber. I've been checking the damage. The roof needs new shingles where the torch hit, and we should probably reinforce the west wall. But overall, we were lucky. Lucky isn't the word I'd use, Kyle said. Then what word would you use? We're alive. The cabin's standing, and we sent a clear message that we won't be intimidated. Ethan set down the lumber. I've spent 2 years playing small, trying not to make waves. Last night reminded me what it feels like to stand for something. It hurts, yes, but it also feels like living. They worked through the morning, repairing damage and strengthening weak points. The physical labor was meditative, giving Kyle's restless mind something concrete to focus on. But underneath the rhythms of hammer and saw, he felt the pressure of decisions unmade, futures uncertain, paths that diverged with every choice. Around noon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Kyle's hand went to the rifle leaning against the cabin wall, tension flooding back instantly. But as the figure approached, he recognized the horse, Sheriff Bridger's roan mare. The sheriff dismounted slowly, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who'd spent the night riding hard. I need to talk to all of you. They gathered in the cabin's shade. Bridger accepted water gratefully, drank deeply, then set the cup down with a sigh that seemed to come from his bones. Judge Morrison's not coming back, he said without preamble. I rode through the night to reach him, but he made his position clear. He ruled on your case already, and what happens after is between you and the town. He won't intervene again. So we're on our own, Ethan said. Not entirely. Marshal Garrett's presence changes things. Federal oversight means Cass and his friends can't act openly without risking serious consequences. Bridger rubbed his face. But it also means the situation's now frozen rather than resolved. You're safe from direct attack, but the underlying hostility remains. What do you suggest? Kyle asked. Honestly, I suggest you leave. Bridger held up a hand before Lena could protest. I know you don't want to hear it. I know you've got principles and courage and all the things that make people heroic in stories. But this isn't a story. It's life. And in life, sometimes the brave thing is knowing when to walk away. Walking away teaches them that violence works, Lena said. That if they push hard enough, different people will always leave. Maybe. Or maybe it teaches them that some battles aren't worth fighting. Bridger's eyes were kind but tired. Miss Hart, I admire your conviction, but conviction doesn't stop bullets. It doesn't prevent arsons when no one's watching. It doesn't change the fact that you're trying to build a life in soil that doesn't want you. Then we change the soil, Lena said stubbornly. You can't change soil. You can only work with what you have. Bridger stood, preparing to leave. But I can see you've made your decision, so I'll just say this. Be careful. Cass Miller's pride is wounded. The men who rode out here last night are embarrassed. Embarrassment and wounded pride make people dangerous in unpredictable ways. He rode away, leaving them with advice they had no intention of following. Kyle watched him go, feeling the weight of all the reasonable voices telling them to quit, to compromise, to accept that some fights couldn't be won. He's right, you know, Kyle said quietly. About what? Lena's voice carried warning. About this being harder than it needs to be. About us choosing the difficult path when easier ones exist. He turned to face her. Lena, I love you. That's not in question anymore. But loving you means wanting what's best for you, even if that's not me. Don't! Her voice went hard. Don't you dare use love as an excuse to push me away. I'm not pushing you away. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need partnership. She stepped closer. You think I don't know this is hard? You think I haven't counted the cost? I've lost friends. My father's lost income. We're targets now in a town that already barely accepted us. But I choose it anyway, because the alternative is living in a world where fear wins and love has to hide. That's not fair. Life's not fair. Her eyes blazed. My mother died at 43 from a heart that gave out under stress she wouldn't have faced if she'd been male. That wasn't fair. But she never once regretted the battles she fought, because fighting meant she was living according to her principles. I won't dishonor her memory by doing less. Ethan had been silent, but now he spoke. Kael, I understand the impulse to protect. After Catherine died, I spent 2 years trying to protect Lena from everything. Grief, disappointment, conflict, risk. But I was really just trying to protect myself from losing her too. And in the process, I was suffocating us both. This is different, Kael said. This is actual danger. So was Philadelphia. Ethan's voice carried old pain. The stress, the constant fighting, the way the city ground her down. I told myself if we just moved, if we just started over, everything would be safe. But safety isn't the same as living. And Lena's right. We can't build lives on the foundation of fear. Kael looked between them, these two people who'd become his family in ways he'd never expected. So we stay. We keep fighting. We hope that eventually the town changes its mind. We stay, Lena confirmed. We fight, and we build something so beautiful that even the people who hate us have to admit it has value. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors, 3 women from town, arriving in a wagon driven by Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who'd held forth about Kael's danger at the church social. Kael's hand moved toward his rifle, but Lena caught his wrist. Wait, she said quietly. Let's see what they want. The women approached cautiously, their expressions uncertain. Mrs. Patterson was in her 50s, with graying hair and the permanently worried expression of someone who'd spent her life anticipating disaster. Beside her were 2 younger women, the shopkeeper's wife and a rancher's daughter Kael recognized from town. Mr. Rourke, Miss Hart. Mrs. Patterson's voice was formal. We'd like to speak with you, if you're willing. About what? Kael's tone was neutral, giving nothing. About last night. Mrs. Patterson glanced at her companions, gathering courage. About what almost happened and what it means for all of us. Lena gestured to the porch. Would you like to sit? They settled uneasily, the women clearly uncomfortable but determined. Mrs. Patterson twisted her hands in her lap, then forced herself to meet Kael's eyes. My husband was part of that mob last night, she said quietly. He came home at dawn, wouldn't talk about what happened. But I heard from others. I heard about the torches, the threats, the federal marshal who stopped it from becoming something worse. Her voice thickened. And I realized my husband almost became a murderer. A man I've been married to for 30 years almost burned down a cabin with people inside, all because he was afraid. It wasn't just fear, the shopkeeper's wife said. Her name was Margaret, Kael remembered. It was pride, too. And the need to feel in control, to feel like they were protecting something. They were protecting their own importance, the rancher's daughter added bitterly. Her name was Sarah, barely 20, with angry eyes. My father talks about tradition and order and protecting the town's character, but really, he just can't stand the idea that someone might live differently than he thinks they should. Mrs. Patterson nodded. We're not here to excuse them or to ask for forgiveness on their behalf. That's not ours to give. We're here because we need you to know that not everyone in Dry Hollow thinks the same way. Some of us are ashamed of what happened last night. Shame's a start, Kael said carefully. But it doesn't undo what was done. No, it doesn't. Mrs. Patterson's eyes held his. But maybe it can lead to something better. Maybe if enough people are ashamed, the ones who aren't will find themselves isolated instead of supported. That's optimistic, Lena said, echoing Kael's words from that morning. I prefer necessary. Mrs. Patterson almost smiled. My husband won't talk about last night, but he also won't look me in the eye. That tells me something changed for him. Maybe not enough. Maybe not permanently. But maybe it's a crack in the certainty that makes men dangerous. Margaret leaned forward. We're forming a group. Women who are tired of watching their husbands and fathers and brothers make decisions based on fear instead of justice. We can't vote, can't hold office, can't legally prevent what happened last night from happening again, but we can apply pressure in other ways. What ways? Ethan had been listening from the doorway, and now he moved closer. Social pressure. Sarah's voice carried vindictive satisfaction. My mother controls the social calendar in this town. If she decides certain men aren't welcome at dinners and gatherings, they become pariahs. If wives refuse to cook for husbands who participated in mob violence, those men get uncomfortable fast. You're talking about domestic warfare, Lena said. We're talking about using the only power we have. Margaret's jaw set. We can't change laws. We can't override decisions made in saloons and at ranches, but we can make life difficult for men who act without conscience. And we can support people like you who are trying to build something better. Mrs. Patterson pulled a bundle from her bag. Fabric, thread, a carefully wrapped loaf of bread. It's not much, but we wanted you to know that you're not as isolated as Cass Miller wants you to believe. There are people in Dry Hollow who see what you're trying to do and who want you to succeed. Lena accepted the bundle, her eyes bright. Thank you. This means more than you know. It should mean something. Mrs. Patterson stood, her companions following. Because you're fighting for all of us, not just yourselves. You're fighting for the idea that this town can be more than just fear and suspicion. That's worth supporting. They left as quietly as they'd come, their wagon rattling back toward town. Kyle watched them go, feeling something shift in his understanding of what they were facing. It wasn't everyone against them. It was some people against them, while others watched uncertain, while still others quietly supported from the shadows. That changes things, Ethan said. Does it? Cale was still skeptical. 3 women bringing bread doesn't stop 20 armed men. No, but it breaks the illusion of unity. Lena unwrapped the bread, broke off a piece, offered it to Kyle. As long as Cass and his friends could claim they spoke for the whole town, they had power. But if cracks appear, if other voices emerge, suddenly they're just one faction among many. A violent faction, but not an invincible one. She bit into the bread, chewed thoughtfully. Wars are won not just through combat, but through erosion of support. If the women of Dry Hollow withdraw their tacit approval, that erodes Cass's base. He becomes less a defender of community values and more just an angry man with a gun. Kyle wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that social pressure and women's quiet resistance could accomplish what federal marshals and legal rulings couldn't. But he'd seen too many conflicts to trust in anything but concrete change. The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. Kyle and Ethan worked on the cabin, expanding it from simple shelter into something approaching a home. Lena divided her time between Broken Creek and town, maintaining visibility, refusing to hide. And slowly, incrementally, things began to shift. The shopkeeper started selling to Kyle again, his wife's influence apparently outweighing Cass's pressure. A rancher whose wife was friends with Mrs. Patterson nodded to Ethan on the street instead of looking away. Small gestures, but they accumulated like coins in a jar. Not enough to buy safety, but enough to suggest that safety might eventually be possible. On the 4th day, Cass Miller himself appeared at Broken Creek. He came alone, unarmed, his horse moving slowly like he was giving Kyle time to prepare for whatever came next. Kyle watched him approach from the porch, rifle across his knees, Lena and Ethan positioned inside where they could provide backup if needed. Cass dismounted 20 yards out. I'm here to talk. Nothing else. Then talk. Cass moved closer, stopping at the porch steps. Up close, he looked older than Kale remembered. Lines of exhaustion carved deep around his eyes, shoulders carrying weight that showed in their slump. My wife stopped talking to me, Cass said abruptly. 4 days now, she serves meals and tends the house, but she won't speak, won't look at me. Acts like I'm a stranger in my own home. That's between you and her. No, it's because of you. But Cass's voice lacked its usual venom. She heard about the attempted burning, heard I led men with torches to burn you out, and something broke in her. She looks at me now like she doesn't know me. Maybe she doesn't, Kyle said quietly. Maybe. Cass stared at his boots. I've been thinking about that night, about what we almost did. And the thing that keeps hitting me is, we would have done it. If the marshal hadn't arrived, we would have thrown those torches, would have burned the cabin with you inside if you hadn't come out, and we would have called it justice. So what stopped being justice and became something else? Cass was quiet for a long moment. Distance, time, my wife's silence, waking up and realizing that the man in the mirror isn't who I thought I was. And who did you think you were? A protector, someone keeping the town safe from threats. He finally looked up. But you're not a threat, are you? You're just a man trying to live, and I nearly killed you for it. Cale studied him, searching for manipulation or strategy beneath the words. But Cass's expression showed only exhaustion and something that might have been shame. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Cass continued. I know I don't deserve it. I'm here because I owe you the truth. I was wrong about you, about Miss Hart, about what protecting this town really means. He rubbed his face. And I'm here to say it stops. The harassment, the threats, the attempts to drive you out. It stops. Just like that? Just like that. Cass moved back toward his horse. I can't speak for the others who rode with me. Can't promise they'll all fall in line. But I'm done. And without me leading, most of them won't have the spine to continue. Why should I believe you? Cass paused, one hand on his saddle. Because my wife won't look at me, and I'd rather die than spend the rest of my life being a stranger in my own home. Because I'm tired. Because I'm ashamed. Take your pick. They're all true. He mounted his horse, then looked down at Kyle. For what it's worth, you're braver than I am. You came here with nothing and built something. I've been here my whole life and nearly destroyed it. He rode away, not waiting for response. Lena emerged from the cabin once he was gone. Do you believe him? I don't know, Kyle admitted, but I think he believes himself. Whether that lasts, that's the question. Either way, it's movement. She took his hand. The ice is cracking, Kyle. Can you feel it? He could feel the way the town's certainty had begun to fracture, the way absolute conviction was giving way to doubt and questioning. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the possibility of victory, which was something they hadn't had before. That night, lying beside Lena in the cabin's darkness, propriety finally abandoned completely, their relationship now openly acknowledged, Kyle felt something unfamiliar. Hope, yes, but more than that. A sense of belonging that went beyond mere acceptance. For the first time since leaving war behind, he felt like he was building something that mattered, something that might last. What are you thinking? Lena's voice was soft in the darkness. That I never expected this. What? Any of it. You. This. He gestured at the cabin around them. A life worth defending. And now that you have it? Now I'm terrified of losing it. He turned to face her, though he could barely see her features in the darkness. Everything I've ever built, I've destroyed. Every place I've belonged, I've had to leave. What if this is the same? What if my presence here poisons everything eventually? Then we'll deal with it. Her hand found his face, thumb tracing his cheekbone. But Kyle, you're not poison. You're fertilizer. You arrived in sterile soil and forced things to grow. This town was dying from fear and stagnation. You made it confront itself. That's not poison. That's medicine. Medicine tastes bitter. So does whiskey, but people drink it anyway. She kissed him. Stop looking for reasons this won't work and focus on making it work. Is that your mother's wisdom? That's my wisdom. Her voice carried gentle humor. My mother would probably say something about foundation load-bearing and structural integrity, but sometimes love's enough without the metaphor. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, creek water over stones, wind through scrub grass, the distant yip of coyotes marking territory. It was the soundtrack of the borderlands, harsh and beautiful and honest. Sleep came slowly, but when it finally arrived, Kyle dreamed not of war, but of building, of raising walls and fitting windows, of Lena beside him laughing at some joke he'd made, of a life stretching forward instead of always looking back. The next morning brought news that would test everything. Sheriff Bridger arrived at dawn, his face grave. There's been an incident. They gathered on the porch, tension immediate. "What kind of incident?" Ethan asked. 3 men from the mob, not Cass but others who rode with him, got drunk last night and decided they weren't finished. They rode out toward native lands looking to cause trouble, wanted to provoke something that would make you look dangerous by association. What happened? Cale's voice was tight. They got ambushed by a native hunting party. 2 are dead, 1's badly wounded. Bridger's expression was grim. And now the town's in an uproar. Half are saying this proves that having you here brings danger. The other half are pointing out that those men went looking for trouble and found it. But either way, tensions are higher than ever. "They're going to blame me," Cale said. "Some will." Bridger didn't sugarcoat it. "They'll say your presence here emboldens the tribes, gives them reason to strike at settlers. Never mind that those men were drunk idiots looking for violence. Never mind that this hunting party was defending their own territory. You'll be the convenient scapegoat." "Then we need to get ahead of it," Lena said. "We need to control the narrative before they do." "How?" Kyle felt the old helplessness returning. "I can't prove a negative, can't prove that I had nothing to do with what happened." "But you can prove what you stand for." Lena's mind was already working. "We call a town meeting, open to everyone, and you speak. They won't listen." "Some won't," she agreed, "but some will, and that's enough." The meeting was scheduled for Saturday evening in the church, the same building where Kyle's hearing had been held. The entire town turned out, curiosity and anger filling the pews in equal measure. Kale stood at the front, feeling the weight of collective judgment, Lena and Ethan flanking him like bookends. The crowd murmured until Kyle raised his hand for silence. When the noise died, he spoke. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," he began. "I came looking for peace, for a place where my past didn't define my future. But I've learned that peace isn't something you find. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice." "Pretty words from a man who brings death," someone shouted from the back. "I haven't brought death," Kyle said evenly. 3 men brought it on themselves by riding into territory that wasn't theirs, carrying weapons and looking for violence. "Their deaths are tragic, but they're not my responsibility." "Your presence here made them feel threatened." "No." Kale's voice hardened. "Their fear made them feel threatened. Fear they could have chosen not to act on. Fear they could have questioned instead of weaponized." He scanned the crowd. "I know what I am. I know my history. I was a soldier and soldiers do terrible things, but I chose to stop. Chose to put down weapons and pick up tools. That choice should matter." Mrs. Patterson stood. "It does matter, and more importantly, it shows the rest of us what's possible. If a man who's seen what Mr. Rourke has seen can choose peace, what excuse do we have for choosing violence?" "Survival," the rancher from the mob spat the word. "We're on the edge of native lands. We're constantly under threat. And this man thinks we can all just hold hands and sing songs while our neighbors plot against us?" "I think," Kyle said carefully, "that violence creates more violence. That fear breeds fear, and that the only way to break the cycle is for someone to choose differently, even when it's hard." "Those are nice principles for someone with nothing to lose," another voice called. "Easy to preach peace when you're alone on a homestead. Harder when you've got a wife and children to protect." "You're right," Cale acknowledged. "It is easier for me. I have less to lose. But that's exactly why I need to be the one choosing peace, so that someday people with families feel safe enough to do the same." The debate raged for another hour, voices rising and falling, accusations and defenses, fear and hope battling for dominance. But something had shifted. The conversation was happening at all. People were listening even when they disagreed, and the absolute certainty that had characterized the town's earlier position had fractured into nuance. When the meeting finally ended, no clear consensus had emerged. But Kyle caught nods from people who'd previously looked through him, heard murmured agreements from unexpected quarters, saw Cass Miller sitting silent and thoughtful instead of leading opposition. Change was happening. Slow as geology, painful as birth, but happening. Walking back to Broken Creek under a sky full of stars, Lena took Cale's hand. "You did good tonight. I just told the truth." "That's more than most people manage." She squeezed his hand. "You gave them permission to question their own fear. That's powerful." "Is it powerful enough?" Time will tell. She stopped walking, turned to face him. But Kael, regardless of what happens with the town, we've already won something important. We've proven that love can exist in hostile soil. That courage doesn't always look like fighting, that sometimes the bravest thing is choosing to stay. He pulled her close, feeling the solid reality of her against him, and understood that she was right. Whatever came next, whether the town accepted them or continued resisting, whether Cass's change of heart lasted or crumbled, they'd already accomplished something impossible. They'd found each other in a place designed to keep people separate, and that had to count for something. The walk home took them through moonlit desert, past familiar landmarks that had become anchors of belonging. The bent juniper tree, the dry wash that sometimes ran with flash floodwater, the ridge where sunset always painted the rocks gold. This was their land now, not just legally, but emotionally. They'd watered it with effort and fear and hope, and it had become home. Back at the cabin, they found Ethan had lit lamps and started coffee. He looked up as they entered, his expression thoughtful. "That meeting changed something," he said. "I could feel it. The town's starting to see that rigid certainty is its own kind of prison." "Some of them," Kael corrected. "Others will never change." "Then we focus on the ones who can." Ethan poured coffee into 3 cups. Catherine used to say that social change happens through conversion of the persuadable. You can't convince everyone, but you don't need to. You just need enough people questioning the status quo that resistance becomes exhausting. Is that what we're doing? Exhausting them into acceptance? We're giving them permission to be better than their fear. Ethan raised his cup. To small victories and the people brave enough to claim them. They drank to that, 3 people bound by circumstance and choice, into something resembling family. Outside, the desert night continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human drama. But inside, warmed by lamplight and coffee and connection, Kael felt the impossible becoming real. He was home, and home was something worth defending. The fragile detente held for 2 weeks, each day passing without incident, feeling like both victory and borrowed time. Kael threw himself into work, not just on the cabin anymore, but helping neighbors with projects they'd been putting off. A fence repair here, a well reinforcement there, small gestures that said he wanted to be part of something larger than his own survival. Some accepted his help with gratitude. Others turned him away with faces that showed the war between practicality and prejudice wasn't yet decided. Lena continued her quiet campaign, refusing to make herself smaller to accommodate fear. She walked through town with her head high, spoke to everyone regardless of their opinion of Kael, and slowly, painfully slowly, the whispers began to shift from condemnation to curiosity. Women who'd previously avoided her started nodding in passing. A few even stopped to talk, careful conversations that skirted the central conflict but suggested openness to something different. But underneath the surface calm, pressure still built. Not everyone had embraced Cass Miller's change of heart. A core group, maybe 6 or 7 men, still gathered at the saloon every evening, their voices carrying through open windows with complaints about weakness and surrender, and the dilution of everything that had made Dry Hollow strong. Their leader was the rancher with the flint eyes, a man named Garrett, who'd ridden in the mob but hadn't faced consequences because Marshal Garrett had focused on Cass as the instigator. "They're planning something," Sheriff Bridger warned during one of his increasingly frequent visits to Broken Creek. "I can feel it. That particular kind of quiet that comes before men do stupid things." "What kind of something?" Kael asked. "Don't know specifics. But Garrett's been making speeches about how the town's going soft, how allowing you to stay sets a dangerous precedent." Bridger's jaw worked. "He's lost influence since Cass stepped back. That makes him more dangerous, not less. Men don't give up power gracefully." "So what do we do?" Lena asked. "You could leave." Bridger said it without hope, already knowing the answer. "We've established that's not happening," Ethan said firmly. "Then you stay vigilant, and you understand that what comes next might not be about you at all. It might be about Garrett proving he's still relevant." The sheriff's warning proved prophetic 3 days later when word came that Garrett and his remaining loyalists had ridden toward native lands, carrying weapons and ultimatums about boundary disputes that had been settled years ago. The message was clear. If the town wouldn't drive Kyle out, they'd create chaos that made his presence untenable. Kale was repairing the corral when Cass Miller arrived, riding fast, his face showing an urgency that sent ice through Kyle's veins. "They're going to get everyone killed," Cass said without preamble. "Garrett and 6 others rode out this morning, looking to provoke the tribes. They're saying they're defending settler rights, but really they're just trying to restart the conflict, so the town has to choose sides again." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm done watching this town destroy itself over pride and fear." Cass dismounted. "And because you're the only person who might be able to stop it." "Me? I'm the reason they're doing this." "No, you're the excuse they're using. There's a difference." Cass's expression was grim. "You're also someone who knows warfare, who understands tactics and de-escalation, and who the native leaders might actually talk to, since you're not part of the settlers who've been pushing boundaries for years." "That's a lot of assumptions." "It's all I've got." Cass's voice carried desperation. "If Garrett succeeds in provoking an attack, people die. Maybe a lot of people. And the town tears itself apart afterward, half blaming the natives, half blaming the provocateurs, all of it becoming an excuse for more violence." Cale looked at Lena, at Ethan, reading the question in their faces. This was a choice. Stay safe and let events unfold, or risk everything trying to prevent catastrophe. The smart decision was obvious, but smart had never been his strength. "If I go out there," Kyle said slowly, "I'm putting myself between 2 groups with guns and grievances. That's a good way to catch bullets from both directions." "I know." Cass met his eyes. "But I'm asking anyway, because you're braver than I ever was, and because someone needs to try." "I'll go with you," Lena said immediately. "No." Kyle's voice was sharp. "This is different from defending the cabin. This is riding into active conflict. Then you'll need someone watching your back." Her chin lifted with familiar stubbornness. "I'm coming." "Lena, we've established I don't take orders well." She was already moving toward the horses. "Besides, the native leaders are more likely to listen if there's a woman present. Shows you're not just a war party." Ethan grabbed supplies, water, bandages, anything that might be useful. "I'll stay here and alert the sheriff. If you're not back by sunset, we're coming after you." They rode out within minutes, Cale, Lena, and Cass, 3 people who 6 weeks ago had been on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. The irony wasn't lost on Kyle. He was riding toward potential violence alongside a man who'd tried to burn down his home in order to prevent a conflict that existed partly because of his own presence. "Where did they go?" Kyle asked as they rode. "Toward the northern boundary near Sacred Springs. It's disputed territory. Natives say it's part of their traditional lands. Settlers claim it was included in old treaties." Cass urged his horse faster. "Garrett's plan is probably to occupy the spring, force a confrontation, then claim self-defense when things turn violent." "That's a plan designed to start a war." "That's the point." Cass's voice was bitter. "He wants war, wants the town united against an external enemy instead of fighting among ourselves. It's easier to hate outsiders than to question our own failures." They rode hard for an hour, the desert landscape growing rockier as they approached the disputed territory. Sacred Springs sat in a canyon, a rare permanent water source that made it valuable to everyone. Cale could see why it was contested. In the borderlands, water was life, and life was worth fighting for. They found Garrett and his men occupying the high ground above the springs, rifles trained on the canyon approach. Below, a group of native warriors had taken defensive positions, clearly unwilling to cede access to water their people had used for generations. "That's a powder keg," Kyle said quietly. "And Garrett's got the match." Cass pulled his horse to a stop. "How do we approach without getting shot?" Carefully, Kale studied the positions, his military training providing tactical assessment. "Garrett's expecting native attack, not intervention from town. We ride in from his flank, hands visible, moving slow. And hope he doesn't shoot us for interfering. That's the general idea." They approached cautiously, hands raised, Kyle calling out as they drew near. "Garrett, it's Cale Rourke, Cass Miller, and Lena Hart. We're coming to talk." Garrett's rifle swung toward them. "You're not welcome here, Rourke. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns everyone," Cale kept his voice level. You're about to start a war that'll kill people on both sides. That concerns me plenty. We're defending settler rights. You're defending your ego, Cass's voice carried across the rocks. This isn't about territory. It's about you proving you're still relevant after the town rejected your leadership. Garrett's face flushed with rage. I'm doing what you were too coward to finish. This town needs strength, not compromise. This town needs survival. Cale had reached the edge of Garrett's position. And starting a war over pride isn't strength, it's suicide. One of Garrett's men shifted nervously. Boss, maybe we should listen. If Cass thinks this is wrong, Cass sold us out for domestic peace, Garrett spat. He let his wife make him soft, but I won't betray what this town stands for. And what does it stand for? Lena's voice cut through, clear and challenging. Because from where I'm standing, you've reduced it to nothing but fear and violence. Is that the legacy you want? Dry Hollow remembered as the town that chose war over reason? Better that than being remembered as the town that surrendered to outsiders. Below, the native warriors were shifting, clearly confused by the argument happening above them. Cale recognized their leader, a man in his 40s with the bearing of someone who'd earned respect through wisdom and courage. Their eyes met across the canyon, and Cale saw recognition there, not of him personally, but of his type. Soldier to soldier, warrior to warrior. Cale made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. He dismounted, raised his hands high, and began walking down into the canyon, away from Garrett's position toward the native warriors. Rourke, what are you doing? Cass called. Something stupid, Cale shouted back. But it's the only thing I can think of. He walked slowly, hands raised, every sense alert for the sound of a rifle being cocked. He was completely exposed, vulnerable to attack from either side. But sometimes vulnerability was its own kind of strength. It forced everyone to decide what kind of people they wanted to be. The native leader stepped forward, his own hands visible and empty. They met in the middle of the canyon, near the springs where water bubbled up from ancient rock. You're the one they call Rourke, the leader said in heavily accented English. The warrior who builds. I'm trying to build, Cale corrected, not always successfully. Yet you walk into danger unarmed, trying to prevent conflict. The man's eyes were intelligent and assessing. Why? Because I'm tired of violence, tired of watching fear drive decisions, tired of people dying over pride and territory when there's enough of both to share. The settlers keep pushing, keep taking. Some do, Cale acknowledged, but not all. And those men up there, they don't speak for everyone. They speak for themselves and their need to matter. The leader looked past Cale to where Garrett and his men watched. If we leave now, they will claim victory. We'll say natives back down. We'll push harder next time. If you fight now, people die. Maybe including you, maybe including them. Definitely including others who had nothing to do with this conflict. Cale gestured at the springs. This water has been here longer than any of our people. It'll be here after we're gone. Is it worth dying over, or is it worth finding a way to share? Your people don't share. Some of us are trying to learn. Cale met his eyes. I'm asking you to give us a chance, not because we deserve it, but because the alternative is more death, more grief, more children growing up knowing only conflict. The leader was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, You have courage, Rourke. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. Is that a yes? It's a willingness to talk, but not here, not with those men pointing guns. He gestured toward the canyon's edge. There is a place, neutral ground, where tribal councils meet with settlers who come in good faith. If you can bring leaders from your town, real leaders, not fools with rifles, we will meet. I'll bring them, Cale promised. Give me 3 days. The leader nodded once, then called out in his own language. His warriors melted back into the rocks, disappearing like they'd never been there. Cale stood alone in the canyon, feeling the weight of what he'd just committed to, hoping he could deliver. He walked back up to where Garrett stood fuming. They're willing to talk. Neutral ground, 3 days, with real representatives from town. And you just promised them that? Garrett's face was purple. You've got no authority. Neither do you. Cale's voice went cold. But the difference is, I'm offering a path that doesn't end in bodies. You're just offering pride. Garrett raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Cale's chest, You've ruined everything. Put the gun down, Garrett. Cass had moved closer, his own weapon now aimed at Garrett. This is done. Traitor! Garrett swung toward Cass. You were supposed to be the town's strength. I was supposed to be a lot of things. Cass's voice was steady. Turns out, I was mostly just afraid, but I'm learning. And the first lesson is, strength isn't the same as violence. The other men with Garrett were watching uncertainly. Without the immediate threat of native attack, without the adrenaline of conflict, they looked less like warriors and more like what they were, farmers and ranchers who'd gotten swept up in someone else's certainty. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Garrett stood alone, his rifle still raised, his face showing the terrible realization that his moment had passed. Finally, with a sound that might have been a sob or a curse, he lowered his gun. This town is finished, he said. You've made us weak. No, Lena said quietly. She'd ridden down during the standoff and now sat on her horse with absolute calm. We've given the town a chance to be something better than its fear. Whether it takes that chance is up to everyone else. They rode back to Dry Hollow in silence, the weight of what had almost happened pressing down on all of them. Garrett and his men peeled off toward their ranches, shame or anger or both making conversation impossible. Only Kyle, Lena, and Cass continued to town. Sheriff Bridger met them on the outskirts, Ethan beside him. We were about to organize a search party. We found them, Kyle said, and we found a better way. The town meeting that night was the largest yet. Word had spread about the confrontation at Sacred Springs, about Garrett's attempt to start a war, and Kyle's negotiation with the tribal leader. People came from outlying ranches, from businesses that usually stayed neutral, from corners of Dry Hollow that rarely involved themselves in community decisions. Kyle stood at the front of the church again. But this time he wasn't alone. Cass stood beside him, a visible symbol of change. Sheriff Bridger was there, and Mrs. Patterson, with her coalition of women. Even Garrett came, sitting in the back with his jaw clenched, his presence a reminder that not everyone was ready to move forward. 3 days from now, Kyle began, I'm meeting with tribal leaders at neutral ground to discuss how we share resources without killing each other over them. I need representatives from Dry Hollow to come with me. People the community trusts. People willing to talk instead of fight. And if talking doesn't work, someone called out, then we try again and again, until it does or we're too tired to fight anymore. Kale's voice strengthened. I know that's not a satisfying answer. I know you want certainty. But certainty is what got us here. Everyone absolutely sure they were right. Absolutely sure the other side was wrong. Absolutely sure compromise was weakness. So what's the alternative? The question came from a rancher Kale didn't know. We just give up everything our people built? We share it with the people who were here first. Lena stood, her voice carrying through the church. My mother used to say that good architecture accommodates change, that buildings which can't adapt eventually collapse. The same is true for communities. Dry Hollow can adapt, can find ways to coexist with its neighbors, or it can collapse under the weight of its own rigidity. Your mother's dead, someone said cruelly. Maybe her principles died with her. Maybe. Lena's voice didn't waver. Or maybe she died because the world couldn't handle her principles yet. I'd rather live trying to prove her right than die knowing I proved her wrong. The debate raged for hours. Accusations and defenses, fears and hopes, every variation of what if and why not. But underneath the argument, something was shifting. People were listening to each other instead of just waiting to speak. Questions were being asked in genuine curiosity rather than rhetorical attack. The bedrock of certainty that had made compromise impossible was cracking. Near midnight, Mrs. Patterson stood. I propose that Cass Miller, Sheriff Bridger, and my husband represent the town at this meeting. 3 men with different perspectives but shared commitment to Dry Hollow's survival. Your husband, Cass looked surprised. Patterson was part of the mob that came after Rourke. Which means he understands both sides of this conflict. Mrs. Patterson's voice carried steel. He's ashamed of what he almost did. That shame can be useful if it leads to better choices. Patterson stood slowly, his face showing every one of his years. I don't deserve the trust, but I'd like to earn it back, if you'll let me try. The vote was close, but it carried. 3 days from now, Kyle would ride to neutral ground with 3 representatives of Dry Hollow, hoping to build something more durable than fear. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and cold. Kyle dressed carefully, choosing clothes that showed respect without suggesting subservience. Lena helped him, her hands steady even though he could see worry in her eyes. "What if this doesn't work?" she asked quietly. "Then we tried." He caught her hands. "That has to count for something. It counts for everything." She kissed him. "Whatever happens today, remember, you've already changed this town. You've made people question assumptions they thought were bedrock. That's victory, regardless of what comes next." They rode out together. Cale, Lena, Ethan, Cass, Bridger, and Patterson. 6 people carrying the hopes of a community that was just beginning to understand that survival meant transformation. The neutral ground was a clearing near the borderlands, marked by ancient stones that predated either culture's claim to the land. The tribal delegation was already there. The leader Kyle had met, plus 2 elders and a younger woman who introduced herself as their record keeper. They sat in a circle, sharing food first, a ritual of trust that required everyone to be vulnerable simultaneously. Then they talked. It wasn't easy. There were grievances on both sides, histories of violence and broken promises, reasons to distrust that went back generations. But they talked anyway, each side slowly beginning to understand that the people across from them were exactly that, people, with fears and hopes and families they wanted to protect. The breakthrough came when Patterson spoke. "I almost burned down a man's home because I was afraid. Afraid he'd bring change I couldn't control. Afraid I'd lose the world I understood." His voice cracked. "But that fear nearly made me a murderer, nearly destroyed everything I actually value, my marriage, my conscience, my soul. I don't want to live that way anymore." The tribal leader studied him. "That is honest. Honesty is rare between our peoples. Then maybe it's time we made it common." Patterson looked around the circle. "We can't change the past, can't undo the violence and broken promises, but maybe we can build a different future. One where our children don't inherit our fear." They talked until sunset, hammering out agreements that were more framework than solution. Shared access to water sources, quarterly meetings to address conflicts before they escalated, joint patrols to prevent the kind of provocations Garrett had attempted. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. As they prepared to leave, the tribal leader approached Kyle. "You are an unusual man, Rourke. You carry great violence, but choose great peace." "I'm just tired of being afraid," Kyle said. "That is wisdom many never learn." The leader gripped his arm. "We will honor this agreement, but its success depends on your people honoring it as well." "We'll try," Kyle promised. "That's all any of us can do." The ride back to Dry Hollow felt different, lighter somehow, like they were carrying possibility instead of just preventing disaster. The town that greeted them was anxious, eager for news, ready to either celebrate or condemn depending on what they'd accomplished. Cass called another meeting for that evening. This time, when Kyle stood to report, the room's energy was different. Hostile faces had become curious. Skepticism had softened to cautious hope. And when he explained the agreements they'd reached, the response wasn't unanimous approval, but it wasn't rejection either. "This is just a beginning," Kyle said as he finished. "These agreements will be tested. People will violate them, misunderstand them, try to use them as weapons. But for the first time, we have a structure for talking instead of killing. That has to count for something." The vote to ratify the agreements was closer than Kyle would have liked, but it passed. Dry Hollow had committed to a future that included its neighbors rather than excluding them. In the weeks that followed, the town began its slow transformation. Not everyone changed. Garrett and a few others left, unwilling to live in a place that had rejected their worldview. But most stayed, learning to navigate a community that was messier and more complicated, but also more honest about what it was becoming. Kyle and Lena were married in a small ceremony by the creek at Broken Creek, with Ethan officiating and half the town in attendance. "Mrs." Patterson cried openly, telling anyone who'd listen about how love could survive in hostile soil if tended carefully. Even Cass came, his wife beside him, their hands clasped in a grip that suggested they'd found their own way through difficult terrain. The cabin expanded over the following months, growing from shelter to home to something approaching a gathering place. People came for advice, for help with construction, for the kind of quiet acceptance that Kyle and Lena offered simply by existing. Not everyone came. Not everyone was ready. But enough did that the isolation Kyle had first felt in Dry Hollow became a distant memory. Ethan Hart's surveying business flourished as the peace with the tribes held, new projects requiring accurate mapping of the now shared territories. He threw himself into the work with an energy that suggested he'd finally stopped mourning and started living. In the evenings, he'd join Kyle and Lena on the porch, the three of them watching sunsets paint the desert in impossible colors. "Your mother would be proud," Kyle said to Lena one evening, a year after that first confrontation in town. "She'd be terrified," Lena corrected with a smile. "But yes, proud too. She always believed that the measure of a life was what you built, not what you preserved. We built something here." "We're still building," Kyle said. "Every day is a choice to keep building. Then we choose it." She leaned against him, her hand resting on the barely visible swell of her belly, new life growing in soil that had seemed too hostile for anything beautiful. "We choose it every day." The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in town, the saloon was opening for evening business. Somewhere, families were sitting down to dinner. Somewhere, children were playing games that would prepare them for adult lives none of them could predict. Dry Hollow wasn't perfect. It still had prejudices and fears, still had people who looked at Kyle and saw threat instead of neighbor. But it had changed, had proven that change was possible, that communities built on exclusion could become communities built on inclusion, that love could survive and flourish even in the harshest environments. Kyle Rourke had come to the borderlands looking for peace and found war. But in fighting that war, not with violence but with persistence, not with weapons but with presence, he'd discovered something more valuable than peace. He'd discovered purpose, a reason to wake up each morning and choose to build instead of destroy, to connect instead of isolate, to love instead of fear. The desert wind carried the smell of rain, rare and precious in the dry lands. In the distance, thunder rumbled, promising transformation. Kale stood and walked to the edge of the porch, Lena joining him, her hand finding his automatically. "Storm's coming," she observed. "Good," Kyle said. "We could use the rain." They stood together watching the storm approach. Two people who'd chosen each other against all reasonable advice, who'd built a life in soil that everyone said couldn't sustain it, who'd proven that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. Behind them, the cabin stood solid, walls straight, roof sound, windows glowing with lamplight. Ahead of them, the storm rolled closer, bringing the water that would make the desert bloom. And between past and future, in the present moment that was all anyone ever really had, Kyle Rourke understood that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for. Not peace exactly. Peace was too simple, too static, too much like death. But something better. A life of constant effort and daily choice, of problems that required solving and conflicts that required navigating, of love that demanded work and work that felt like love. A life worth living. The first drops of rain began to fall, splattering on the dry earth with sounds like applause. Lena laughed and held out her hand, catching water in her palm like it was precious, which in the borderlands it was. Kyle joined her, feeling the rain on his face, washing away dust and doubt, and the last remnants of the isolation he'd carried for so long. "We should go inside," Lena said without moving. "We should," Kyle agreed, also not moving. They stood in the rain as it intensified, getting thoroughly soaked, not caring about practical concerns like staying dry or avoiding colds. Because this moment, standing in the first real rain of the season, having survived everything that had tried to break them, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges but that they'd face them together, this moment was too perfect to cut short. The rain fell harder, turning the dusty earth to mud, filling the creek until it overflowed its banks, feeding the scrub grass that would green within days. The desert was coming alive, proving that even the driest soil could bloom given enough water and care and refusal to accept that life was impossible. Kale pulled Lena close, kissed her in the rain, tasted water and hope. And the future they were building one choice at a time. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and transformed her whole face. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." He said it easier now, the words no longer foreign or frightening. And I'm grateful every day that you were stubborn enough to refuse to let me hide. Someone had to save you from yourself. She took his hand, finally leading him toward the cabin. Come on, let's get dry and have dinner and spend the evening being boring and domestic and everything those people said we'd never have. They went inside, leaving the storm to do its work. The rain fell all night, soaking into earth that had been dry too long, filling wells and cisterns, giving everything a chance to start again. By morning, the world looked different, cleaner somehow, renewed, ready for whatever came next. Kael woke to find Lena already up, standing at the window watching dawn break over rain-washed land. He joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Beautiful," she said softly. "It is," he agreed, though he was looking at her reflection in the glass more than the landscape beyond. "I mean, the land. Look how the rain changed everything." "I know what you meant." He turned her to face him. "But I'd argue the most beautiful thing in this cabin is standing right here." She laughed and swatted his chest. "Flattery this early in the morning? You must want something." "Just this." He gestured at the cabin around them, at the life they'd built. "Every morning I wake up wanting exactly this." "Good." She kissed him quickly. "Because this is what you're stuck with. Me, this cabin, this town, this life. No running anymore." "No running," he promised. "We're home." And standing in this morning light, in the cabin they'd built together, in the town they'd helped transform, surrounded by the evidence that love could survive even the most hostile environments, Kael Rourke finally understood what home meant. Not a place where you were always safe, always comfortable, always accepted, but a place where you chose to stay even when it was hard, where you built something bigger than yourself, where you proved that courage and love could change the world one small piece at a time. Outside, Dry Hollow was waking up, a town that would never be perfect but had learned it could be better, a town that had chosen transformation over stagnation, inclusion over exclusion, hope over fear. And at its edge, in a cabin by a creek that now ran full with rainwater, two people who'd fought for that transformation watched the sunrise and knew they'd won something more valuable than any battle. They'd won the right to build a future. And that future, still unwritten but full of possibility, stretched out before them like the desert after rain, beautiful, challenging, and absolutely worth fighting for. The story of Kael Rourke and Lena Hart didn't end that morning. It continued in the life they built, in the children they raised, in the example they set for a community learning that change was possible. It continued in the quarterly meetings between settlers and tribes, in the peace that held more often than it broke, in the slow erosion of fear that happened when people chose courage day after day after day. Their story became Dry Hollow's story, a testament to the power of love to transform hostile soil into fertile ground, to turn outsiders into family, to prove that the most dangerous thing isn't difference but the fear of it. And long after Kael and Lena were gone, their legacy remained in the town they'd helped reshape, in the lives they'd touched, in the proof that one person's choice to stay and fight could change everything. Because in the end, that's what courage looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to build anyway, to love anyway, to hope anyway, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today, and to work like hell to make it true. And in the borderlands, where survival was always uncertain and nothing came easy, that kind of courage was the most valuable thing anyone could possess. It was water in the desert, light in the darkness, the foundation on which everything lasting was built. Kael had come to Dry Hollow carrying nothing but ghosts and guilt. He left behind, years later, when his time finally came, a legacy of transformation, a family that carried his values forward, and a town that remembered him not as the warrior he'd been, but as the builder he'd chosen to become. That was victory. That was redemption. That was home.